Chapter 261, Yes, Deputy Captain! At Barrett's command, the search parties broke off into pairs and threes, combing every thicket and crag across the island. Hours later, the lead scout returned, breathless. "Report, sir. No sign of anyone." Barrett tapped his sword hilt thoughtfully. "Leave 20 men here to keep watch," he ordered. "The rest with me, back to camp." The squads melted away, urgency in their stride. Charles watched them go without surprise. The past month in Wano country had been nothing but relentless warfare, and it was a war he had ignited himself. The moment he resolved to seize Wano, he allowed no rival strongholds to remain. First on his list, the samurai. Under Charles's orders, his men struck without mercy. Daimyos, generals, and seasoned warriors either fell in battle or fled into the surrounding mountains. Today's empty island was just the latest proof of his campaign's efficiency. Yet even a decisive victor must know his limits. With barely 500 combat-ready soldiers at his back, Charles could not pursue every last fugitive. He had done all he could until reinforcements arrived. Wolf was due any day now, and Charles trusted that once Wolf's forces joined them, the final mop-up would be complete. For the moment, all he could do was wait. By the time Wolf arrived, Heitan Orochi's luck had finally run out. The man known as the Black Charcoal Orochi, freshly installed as General of Wano, found himself nowhere near the master of fate he once believed he was. Wano's most flourishing city, celebrated throughout the land as its flower capital, lay in smoldering ruins. Now, pursued relentlessly by Shaluo's men, Orochi had retreated into the mountain forests, clinging to life by sheer force of will. His hatred for Charles burned like wildfire. A month ago, Orochi had discovered the identity of Wano's true invader, a colossal sea lord who had slain Kaido himself and now sought to claim Wano for his own. No warrior dared challenge this giant. Every blade that rose against him was shattered before it could strike. Realizing he was hopelessly outmatched, Orochi abandoned the capital and fled with only a handful of loyal soldiers. They survived as fugitives deep in the wilderness, outlaws eking out a savage existence rather than facing certain death in open battle. Even the famed Frosty Moon cavalry, renowned across the Isles, had been crushed beneath that 5-meter-tall colossus's fist. Every great samurai who once served Orochi had fallen in that onslaught. Now, weak and wounded, Orochi lay hidden among the roots and shadows, his breath shallow and ragged. Each heartbeat reminded him of his failure and of the one man he blamed above all others, Charles. As Wolf closed in, Heitan Orochi could only wait, praying the forest's darkness would shield him long enough to muster one final act of vengeance. Only one of Wano's 5 great clans remains, the Heitan family. Charles, the clan's last scion, doesn't know how much longer they can endure, perhaps a month at best. At last, the volcano's fury is easing. The choking ash cloud that shrouded the sky for weeks has begun to lift, and the once raging rivers of molten rock have finally stilled. After a month of utter darkness, a single ray of sunlight pierces the gloom, heralding the first dawn in what feels like an age. But what it reveals is nothing short of cataclysmic. Lava from the sacred mountain has inundated every bustling town and village, swallowing 2/3 of Wano's land in searing ruin. Survivors, their faces streaked with ash and tears, collapse to their knees, mourning lost loved ones, mourning the homes that no longer stand. The eruption struck without warning. No walls or armies could have stopped it. How many perished beneath that fiery tide will never be known. From his vantage atop a high ridge in the Rabbit Bowl, Charles gazes out over the ruined kingdom. Blackened fields stretch into the distance, broken timbers and smoldering embers where villages once thrived. A heavy silence hangs in the air, broken only by the distant sobs of those who remain. As the sun climbs higher, its warmth feels both a blessing and a cruel reminder of all that has been lost. Chapter 7. The Ruins of Wano. My heart felt oddly calm as I surveyed the devastation. At that moment, Tianue stepped forward, her eyes clouded with conflicting emotions. Just yesterday, she had agreed to journey with me to Wano, but how could a kingdom of such size and strength be reduced to rubble overnight? I noticed the anguish in her gaze and, for the first time in weeks, felt a twinge of guilt. Tianue had spent the last month in hiding, and yet here she stood before me now, as if seeking both answers and solace. I cleared my throat. "Miss Shi," I began, stepping closer, Wano, it was destroyed by an accident. Under the circumstances, do you still wish to stay here with me? Her hands twisted together, and she gave me a bitter look. You brought Wano to ruin, she whispered, her voice trembling. And you expect me to remain behind, picking through ashes? A single tear broke free, then another, until her cheeks were glistening. Helplessly, she let her shoulders slump. I have no home anymore, she choked out, her tears falling like rain in the silent wasteland. I opened my mouth to comfort her. Tianyu, I'm sorry, but the words felt hollow amid such sweeping destruction. And yet, standing on the edge of these broken walls, I realized we both had a choice, leave Wano behind forever, or stay together and rebuild whatever remained of our shattered world. Charles clenched his fists as the woman before him wept. He hated tears, especially a woman's tears. If a man had fallen to sobbing, Charles would have drawn his sword on the spot. But this was no burly warrior. This woman was small and fragile, and her grief left him at a loss. All right, listen, Charles said, softening his tone. Come with me, my boat's big enough. He gestured toward the dock, then reached out and rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. If Elena saw this, she'd scoff and accuse Charles of swooning over another damsel, but Charles ignored such teasing. The woman raised her head and managed a trembling smile. Thank you, she whispered. Her name was Tianyu. If Charles's touch didn't ease her sorrow, at least it offered some support. She'd crossed centuries, traveling 800 years into the past, all to witness the birth of Wano country. And now, she looked out at smoldering rooftops, shattered gates, and rivers running red. Why had she come back, if not to save this land? Every broken statue, every collapsed wall seemed to mock her. Charles followed her gaze and exhaled slowly. The ruins stretched as far as the eye could see. The Wano country is finished, Tianyu said, her voice barely more than a sigh. Charles turned to her, brow furrowed. He dismissed tears so readily, but seeing the devastation around them, he understood. This wasn't just a fallen nation. It was someone's dream, now in ashes. And perhaps, he thought, it was up to them to decide whether Wano's story truly ended here. Tianyue's voice was startlingly calm as she surveyed the wreckage. Well, it's ruined. Charles nodded without a word. She turned to him, her eyes steady. Charles, do you know why I came to the land of Wano? He shook his head, brow furrowed. No idea. A soft sigh escaped her lips. I'm not from this world. In fact, I'm not even from this century. I'm 800 years out of my own time. She looked back at the devastated country. Charles stared at her in silence. I once dreamed of witnessing Wano's birth, she said, a hint of sorrow in her tone. I abandoned my era, crossed time itself, just to see its founding. And now, it lies in ruins, destroyed by your hand. I don't know whether to hate you or to thank you. They held each other's gaze for a long moment. Then Charles reached out and gently took Tianyu by the waist. When Charles lifted Tianyu into his arms, he looked down at her and said, Now that your dream lies in ruins, why not start over? Chapter 262, Leaving Wano Country. Charles held Tianyu in a firm embrace atop the mountain peak. Usually composed, Tianyu's calm immediately gave way to a blush of panic, but he didn't struggle, only bowed his head shyly. Seeing this, Charles's lips curved into a satisfied smile. No resistance meant acceptance. Don't you want to found your own country? Charles murmured, eyes alight with fiery determination as he looked toward the horizon. I'll help you. Wano is already under my control. Whether you succeed in establishing your nation now rests entirely on me. Tianyu stayed silent, but the two of them stood together in a rare moment of stillness. The wind whipped around them, and time itself seemed to slow. It had been over a month since Charles's crew first landed at the Rabbit Bowl. Wolf had sailed in with more than 1,000 men aboard 10 ships, and after weeks of tireless labor, they'd completed the seabed mining operation. The holds of each vessel were now brimming with high-purity seastone, freshly extracted from the ocean floor. Captain, Barrett announced as he strode into Charles's command hall, a stack of reports clutched under his arm. Everything is in place. We're ready to set sail. Charles looked up from the maps spread across the table, nodded, and allowed a confident grin to break through. Then let's leave Wano behind us. This cavernous hall, normally reserved for Kaido's lavish feasts, has now been requisitioned by Charles. He sits at its center, a freshly printed newspaper in hand. His eyes flick across the bold headlines. The beast of the New World, Kaido, slain by the world's greatest swordsman. Roger pirates make triumphant return to the New World. It's taken a full month for word of Kaido's death to spread, word carried by the few pirates who escaped his wrath. Far from grieving, Charles feels a grudging relief. If those survivors had perished, the identity of Kaido's vanquisher would have died with them. But there's more. The Roger pirates, having helped dismantle the old Rocks pirates, are not lingering in the New World. Instead, they've set a deliberate course around the globe, steering clear of the power struggles that rage among the other great pirates. Charles suspects their motive is simply to avoid entanglement, an ambition fitting of Roger himself, who sought no throne, only freedom. He folds the paper, stands, and calls out to his lieutenant. "Well, we're ready. Let's move. We've stayed here long enough, Wolf." With that, Charles strides toward the hall's grand doors, the promise of open sea and fresh adventure waiting beyond. "I'll leave this place to you. Make sure the last of the rebels are wiped out," Barrett said. Charles saluted crisply. "Understood." Barrett and Wolf bowed and stepped out. As the doors closed behind them, Arena entered carrying a swaddled infant, Elena's newborn son. Elena, who had overheard Barrett's orders, looked up with worried eyes. "You're really leaving now?" Charles offered her a reassuring smile. "We've done all we can here. It's time to move on." Elena glanced down at her baby, then met his gaze and nodded. Charles unrolled a large sea chart across the table. A single band of crimson earth encircled the globe, slicing the waters into northern and southern hemispheres. Yet two vast calm belts, one at each entrance to the Grand Line, made direct passage impossible, dividing the world's oceans into 4 distinct blues. "See here," Charles said, tracing a course with his finger. "Every ship can only enter the Grand Line once. We sail its first half to Fishman Island, then scale the Red Line's peak to reach the New World. Beyond that lies the Grand Line's deadliest stretch, and our true destination." He pressed his hand to the map, determination shining in his eyes. "The time has come. Let's set sail." Charles affixed the Seastone slab to the hull. Now nothing would stop him from sailing straight through the calm belt into any of the 4 blues. He studied the chart, eyes flicking from the sprawling east blue to the glittering edge of the north blue. "We'll make for the north blue first," he decided. Wano country lay perilously close to the calm belt, but as long as they slipped past its windless waters, North Blue was theirs. Confident in his plan, Charles folded the map and strode down to the bustling dock. A crowd of crew members waited eagerly at the pier. Charles handed the chart to his shipwright, Vinsmoke Gage, then stepped aboard and called out, "Cast off!" At his command, his family and crew moved into position with practiced precision. First came his children, boarding in neat, excited rows. Next, each of their mothers stepped on deck, supported by their personal attendants. A small army of maids followed, ensuring every last trunk and supply chest was secured. Finally, Charles's elite squad of swordsmen took their places along the rail. In a matter of moments, the once busy harbor was empty. Charles paused to cast a final glance at Wano's distant shoreline, then turned and made his way to the helm. He gave the order in a steady voice, "Set our course for the calm belt." The sails unfurled, the ropes tightened, and the ship creaked free of the pier. With the Seastone slab beneath her keels, nothing stood between Charles and the adventure that awaited in the North Blue. Chapter Decks. "All right, set a course through the doldrums and make for the North Sea." Charles's voice rang out over the deck, commanding yet steady. The ship's navigators exchanged terrified glances. The doldrums were notoriously perilous, a windless expanse where no vessel could hope to drift through unscathed. Worse still, it was crawling with towering sea kings, the sea's deadliest predators. To venture into that living graveyard was madness. But Charles showed no hesitation. With unwavering confidence, he steered his crew straight into the calm zone's still waters, determined to conquer the path no sailor had ever returned from. Meanwhile, within the walls of Wano country, General Haiten Orochi, better known by his fearsome moniker the Black Charcoal Serpent, sat fuming in his private chamber. His eyes, as dark and gleaming as polished obsidian, bore into his subordinates as they approached with urgent news. "Speak," he growled. A samurai retainer bowed deeply. "My lord, the pirate ship has set sail. I witnessed it myself. That massive black vessel slipped beyond the harbor this morning. At this, Orochi's stern expression finally cracked. A triumphant laugh burst from his lips, a low, rumbling sound that echoed off the walls. Ha! The scourge is gone at last! Around him, the samurai and retainers who had cowered under his wrath for weeks allowed themselves relieved smiles. Orochi leapt to his feet, arms raised high as he danced a clumsy, exuberant jig. For a month he'd lain awake night after night, plagued by nightmares of the pirates' black flag, and now, with the threat vanished, he was free to celebrate. The black charcoal serpent had reclaimed Wano's shores, and Charles's crew, unaware of the victory behind them, pressed on into the silent horrors of the doldrums, their fates yet unwritten. Heitan Orochi paced the deck, worry knotting his brow. "I'm afraid the pirates from the outer sea will kill him," he muttered, but even he knew it was his own overactive imagination. Charles had never given Heitan, or his fearsome reputation as the black charcoal serpent, a second thought. The only thing that had ever caught Charles's eye was Heitan's devil fruit power, the snake fruit, Yamata no Orochi model. It was almost too perfect. Charles had learned about the fruit, only to discover that Heitan had already eaten it. Had the fruit still been unclaimed, Charles would have snatched it away in an instant. Now that Heitan wielded its power, Charles simply shrugged it off. But Charles's indifference didn't guarantee Heitan's own safety. Heitan spun toward his samurai captain. "Then did the enemy leave any forces behind?" The captain bowed and reported, "Yes, General. Their main fleet sailed off hours ago, but they've left a sizable garrison. Those men are well trained, and they've been relentlessly hunting down any of our scattered warriors." Heitan's eyes widened. "What? They're still here?" He clenched his fists. "Prepare the men. We'll show these outer sea pirates just how dangerous the black charcoal serpent can be. It looks like they intend to hold this ground for the long haul. We can't let that happen. Have you sent word to the remaining warriors? We must mount a counterattack at once." Heitan the serpent's voice trembled with urgency under the broad canopy of the ancient oak. Charles pressed his palm against the rugged bark, steadying himself. Less than a month had passed since his promotion to general, and already he'd been driven into these remote mountains and primeval forests. Every fiber of his being burned with the desire to strike back, to drive out the invaders once and for all. Chapter 263, Graduation of the First Recruits. A samurai bowed respectfully. "We've made contact," he reported. "With their senior officers fallen, their troops are in disarray. I'm certain that once the general arrives, they'll swear loyalty to you." Heitan Orochi's eyes glittered with triumph. "Excellent," he said. "Summon every available man at once. We'll remind them that Wano belongs to us, and no invader will ever claim it." He could barely contain his excitement at the thought of reclaiming his birthright. Meanwhile, across the waters, from the Totland Sea to Cake Island, the world buzzed with the news. Kaido was dead. No one could fathom how it had happened. In the bustling courtyard of the island's famous bakery, Charles Lingling stared at the morning newspaper, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Kaido, my brother! How could this be?" he cried, his voice echoing off the stone walls and shaking the banners overhead. A nearby chef, seeing Charles's distress, quickly prepared a comforting treat, a long, sweet loaf still warm from the oven. He laid it gently before the young recruit. "Don't dwell on what's lost, Charles," he said quietly. "Grief is natural, but life goes on. We move forward together." Chapter 7. Lingling's eyes lit up the moment she spotted the cake. Before anyone could react, she snatched it and shoved the entire slice into her mouth. "Cake! Cake! It's so good!" she exclaimed, crumbs spilling across her robes. Then her expression darkened. "My brother still owes me a favor, and he hasn't paid up. How could he just drop dead like that? Charles, you'll pay for this." In an instant, Lingling's overlord aura flared around her like a storm cloud. A shockwave ripped through the courtyard. Several younger children were knocked off their feet, landing with dull thuds. Only the eldest siblings remained standing, faces drained of color, staring up at their mother in terror. News of the outburst, and of Charles's role in it, swept through the New World at once. For most, the idea that Charles, the world's peerless swordsman, had slain someone called Kaido was little more than gossip. Kaido was not yet renowned. To the average pirate or marine, he was just another minor warlord. What scandal could there be in one more petty noble biting the dust at Charles's blade? Only the few who remembered Kaido's whispered reputation paused to wonder if a great power had truly fallen. At Marine headquarters, the central parade ground brimmed with fresh recruits pouring out of the training barracks. Fleet Admiral Kong stood on the high podium, his steely gaze sweeping over row after row of disciplined uniforms. A trumpet call rang out. A messenger stepped forward and saluted. "Fleet Admiral Kong, reporting, sir. Recommendation for promotion. Ensign Porcelino, recruit assessment number 3, has earned the rank of Major General. Orders are to dispatch him immediately to the New World, where he will join forces with Fleet Admiral Sengoku in the anti-piracy campaign." Admiral Kong's stern features betrayed a flicker of approval as he watched Porcelino stride toward him. The war against the pirates was heating up, and every reinforcement mattered. With a sharp nod, Kong signaled the next announcement, and the parade ground fell silent once more, ready to receive its new orders. "Yes, sir?" At Sora's command, Porcelino stepped forward, snapped off a crisp salute, and accepted the newly presented Major General's cloak. His face was serious, but he couldn't entirely hide his awkwardness. After all, he'd just placed second in the recruit assessments. "Sakaski, you're number 2 in the assessments, so you're also promoted to Major General. You're assigned to the North Sea to root out the pirates." "Yes, sir. We'll eliminate every last one of them." Sakaski strode up with equal determination and returned Sora's nod of approval. "Monch D. Dorag, top of the class, number 1 recruit. You're promoted to Major General as well, but you'll remain at Navy headquarters." Dorag, who had been standing stoically at the front of the lawn, recruits, inclined his head and replied, "Yes, sir," before stepping back into the ranks. His face gave no hint of emotion, but he felt the envious gazes from the others. Remaining at headquarters meant fewer opportunities for battlefield glory, yet constant proximity to the admirals and high command was itself a powerful stage. After all, a general who chased pirates without making a name for himself would soon be forgotten. But one who worked alongside the Navy's leaders would never go unnoticed. Once Marshal Kong concluded his remarks, the graduation ceremony for the inaugural class of recruits drew to a close. Seated on the dais, Admiral Zepha looked down with pride at the young sailors gathered below. He had spent the past year and a half training these elites, and he was confident that their deployment would raise the Navy's overall strength to new heights. "Zepha," Garp rumbled, finally stirring from his bored slump. "What do you think? Any real standouts among this year's recruits?" Zepha shot a measured glance at the ever-hungry Garp. "Absolutely. Your son Drago is exceptional, of course, but don't overlook the 2 recruits from the North Sea. One wields a natural Logia-type magma fruit, the other a natural Logia-type shining fruit. Their abilities are top tier, and their physical conditioning is just as impressive. They're destined to become future generals." He swept his gaze across the ranks once more. "And those 3 aren't our only prospects. Even the recruits without devil fruit powers have demonstrated remarkable skill and determination. This class is well-rounded and strong, truly the Navy's next generation of leaders. If we train them well, they'll become the backbone of the Navy and bolster our strength." Captain Zepha's voice rang out as he surveyed the silent figures arrayed behind Sokolsky and Porcelino. Their skills were unquestionable, but their methods bordered on brutality. Time and again, Zepha had led this unit to exterminate pirate crews without mercy, no quarter given, even to those who begged for their lives. At the heart of this fearsome detachment stood Sokolsky, the most formidable among them. He never hesitated to charge headlong into battle, unleashing the devastating power of his natural-type magma devil fruit. In the opening stages of any Grand Line engagement, he was all but unstoppable, reducing enemy ships and their crews to molten ruin with terrifying ease. His ruthless efficiency had earned him a dark prestige among the cadets. Already, a number of promising recruits had begun to gravitate toward his banner, forming an unspoken faction. Zepha said nothing. 3 years ago, he would have reprimanded such savagery, or worse, scolded Sokolsky outright. But since that fateful incident, his heart had grown cold. Now his only solace lay in the dedication of these students and their unwavering loyalty. They were the only things left capable of warming the frozen chambers of his soul. Garp munched on a donut as he spoke. Speaking of devil fruits, I happened to come across another Logia type not long ago, the ice fruit. Want me to hand it over so you can train with it? Admiral Zephyr straightened, eyes narrowing. Where did you find it? Are devil fruits that easy to come by these days? You know how rare they are. Marine HQ only managed to secure 2 Logias so far. And now you've turned up a third? Garp laughed, donut crumbs rattling in his throat. Ha! Don't worry about where it came from. The real question is, will you take it or not? Zephyr exchanged a glance with the other admirals. Then, cracking a grin, he nodded. Accepted. With the 3rd elite training camp about to start, we'll slot it in right away. Garp clapped his hands. Excellent. Kuzan, bring him out so our new recruit can meet his future teacher. From behind the dais, a tall figure stepped forward at Garp's call. Kuzan? Ice-blue eyes met Garp's. Kuzan offered a warm smile, nodded once in greeting, and strode up to the podium. Charles surveyed the crisp white vest, deep blue shirt, and Navy captain's coat laid out before him. Just seeing them filled him with confidence. These garments made an immediate, striking impression. Chapter 264. A new mentor for Charles Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp marched onto the training ground, a broad grin splitting his weathered face. He came to a stop beside a tall young recruit and gave a sharp nod. Charles, meet your new instructor, General Zephyr. From today on, you'll train under his command. The moment Charles caught sight of the legendary general, his eyes lit up like twin beacons. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee and bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the dirt. General Zephyr, I've grown up hearing the tales of your exploits. It's an honor to learn from you. Please guide me. General Zephyr's stern expression softened into a warm laugh. He ruffled Charles's shoulder with a firm hand. Ha! So you're Garp's protege, eh? Well, since the old man vouched for you, you're mine now. But don't get cocky. I won't go easy just because you're his favorite. Charles sprang back to his feet, still beaming. Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you. A hush fell over the other recruits. Even Commander Sora, who rarely betrayed emotion, leaned forward with interest. Garp's endorsement was enough to make anyone stop and listen. Off to one side, Captain Crane watched the exchange thoughtfully. Her eyes flicked from the determined faces of the new graduates to the bright-eyed Charles. Garp had just sent one exceptional youth her way. Should she counter with one of her own candidates for advanced instruction? She tapped her chin, weighing her options. General Zephyr, Crane called, stepping forward with a respectful nod. May I have a word? Zephyr turned, arms crossed, while Charles stood at attention, curiosity shining in his gaze. The next phase of training was about to begin, and under a general's watchful eye, every moment would count. Actually, I have a younger sister who's eager to join your elite training camp, Suru spoke up, recalling how Gion had expressed a desire to enlist in the Navy not long ago. Zephyr turned to regard the surgeon, Suru, with interest. Absolutely. If she can pass my trial, she's welcome to enter the elite camp. Suru bowed gratefully. Thank you. I'll send her along when the next recruitment drive opens. With that settled, Marshal Kong dismissed the assembly. A cadre of senior Navy generals trailed behind him as he made his way to his private office. Among them, Drago stuck close to the marshal's side, an unmistakable sign of special favor. Once they were all seated, a sudden crash echoed through the room. Sora sprang to his feet, seething, and threw a newspaper across the table at Vice Admiral Garp. Garp, what's the meaning of this? Sora demanded, his voice trembling with fury. You assured me that as long as the Roger pirates remained active, the New World would be off limits to them. Then why does this report? He jabbed a finger at the paper. Show them making landfall in the Grand Line already. You promised me. For the past 2 years, the Navy has thrown everything it has at the Roger pirates. Vice Admiral, Iron Fist Garp, and Fleet Admiral Sengoku have led repeated blockades doing the bidding of the 5 elders. But every time, Roger and his crew have slipped through their fingers. Now they're safely in the New World, and it's only going to get tougher to catch them. Hey, let me see that! Let me see! Garp barked, popping a rice cracker between his teeth as he snatched the morning paper from the table. He flipped it open and scowled at the headline. That scoundrel Roger actually ran off while the old man's on break. Garp jabbed an accusing finger at the print, though his tone betrayed less real rage than playful grievance. Around the conference table, the other admirals exchanged amused looks. This was classic Garp, always ready with a good-natured complaint. "Garp, you're impossible," Sengoku snapped, half smiling despite himself. He slammed his fist on the table. "Don't worry, Admiral. This time I'll bring Roger to justice." Garp rose to his full height, shrugging on his coat. "Sengoku, hold on. The strategy meeting isn't over yet." Caught off guard, Goku straightened his uniform and laughed awkwardly. "Right, of course. Ha ha!" He sank back into his chair, though his eyes gleamed with determination. The chase was far from finished, and neither were these two seasoned veterans. "Sir, you haven't even finished your meeting yet, and already you're off chasing after Roger. Garp, stop that!" With a sharp bang, Garp flung open the office door and stormed out, leaving Kong's roar of protest echoing behind him. Around the room, the other high-ranking officers of Navy headquarters lowered their heads, their faces betraying no emotion. In the corner, Zephyr clenched his jaw. If anyone dared to speak so boldly to the fleet admiral, it was only Vice Admiral Garp. "Admiral Garp, you're risking the fleet admiral's wrath again. You know how temperamental he is," Zephyr called after him. By now, Kuzan had noticed Garp's exit and hurried forward, eyes alight. "Ha! If you're so eager to get back on the open sea, you don't need this desk job. Let's prepare a ship and set sail for the new world." Garp paused on the threshold, giving Kuzan a curt nod. "Very well, Kuzan." They made their way down to the waterfront, where the dog-headed warship lay ready at its moorings. Garp's stride never faltered. "All right, men. Cast off the lines. I'm going after the Roger pirates." He clambered up onto the deck and turned to shout back at the shore. "Kuzan!" Kuzan leapt aboard at the last second, brushing salt-sprayed planks from his coat. "Hey, Garp, save some of that enthusiasm for the voyage itself," he teased, tossing a knowing grin over the rail. "For a start, you should take lessons in subtlety from Zephyr. The new world isn't a playground for amateurs." Garp merely chuckled, hands planted firmly on his hips. "All right, Admiral Kuzan, welcome aboard." With that, the warship's horns blared, the creaking cables slipped free, and the vessel began to pull away from the pier. Ahead lay the endless stretch of ocean, and with it, Garp's singular goal, to bring in the legendary Roger pirates once and for all. Admiral Kuzan stood on the windswept shore, watching the last of the pursuit vessels vanish into the fading light. "Garp!" he bellowed, his voice lost to the waves. He ground his teeth in frustration. "If we're ever going to pin down those Roger pirates and straighten out Vice Admiral Garp, I need Master Zepha's counsel." Back at Marine headquarters, the Fleet Admiral's office was heavy with gloom. The old man sat slumped in his chair, arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. Vice Admiral Tsuru leaned forward, her tone gentle but firm. "Fleet Admiral, you can't stay angry at Garp. He's always been reckless. When you see him next, just remind him who's in charge, or give him a proper beating if need be." The Fleet Admiral grunted in reluctant agreement. At that moment, Vice Admiral Sora rose from his seat and turned toward the other officers. "All right, we've wasted enough breath. The real emergency is in the New World. The Rockefeller pirates have assassinated Kaido of the Beast Pirates and seized Wano country. What are our orders?" A tense silence fell. Then the Marine Admirals, known collectively as the Hawks, erupted in unison. "Dispatch the fleet at once. We must prevent Charles Rockefeller from fortifying his hold on Wano." "Agreed," Sora said, voice steely. "Issue the orders. At dawn, every available ship sets sail. Charles Rockefeller will answer for his crimes. We need to dispatch 2 generals to the New World immediately." A ripple of agreement spread among the senior naval officers. For a long moment, they all sat in silent anticipation until Zephyr finally leaned forward. "I'm done with frontline duty," he declared. "From now on, I'm focusing solely on training our cadets. I won't set foot in the New World." The Hawk Squadron admirals around the table visibly sagged, sinking back into their chairs. Each had been hoping someone would share their reluctance, and now, at last, one had. Admiral Kong shot Zephyr a sidelong glance. "Since nobody else will volunteer, we'll hint thank. Have to turn up the heat. Raise those bounties so high, they can't claim they never saw the warning." Crane and Zephyr both gave a curt nod. "All right, then," Kong went on. "Let's decide exactly how much the bounties should be." The moment the figures came up, Zephyr shut his eyes, signaling he was out of this discussion too. The remaining officers exchanged uneasy looks. In truth, setting bounties was usually handled by the fleet admirals themselves or by the Marine Civil Administration. Yet here they were, cornered into making the call. Sora could only meet Crane's gaze. The man known as Crane didn't flinch. Instead, he produced 3 wanted posters, one each for Whitebeard, Golden Lion, and Gol D Roger, and laid them on the table. Then, with a faint, knowing smile, he reached into his coat and pulled out the old notice bearing Charles's bounty, holding it up for Sora to see once more. Chapter 265. Besieging the Roger Pirates. In the spacious command chamber of the world government, Fleet Admiral Sora tapped his finger against a dossier marked Rockefeller Charles. This Charles is unusually quiet. He never draws attention to himself, Sora began. That's kept his bounty relatively low so far, but make no mistake, he is far stronger than most give him credit for. Judging by the latest reports, his reward should be a full 30 billion berries. He placed the document on the long table, lined with wanted posters of the world's most notorious pirates. To put this in perspective, Sora continued, sweeping his hand across the wall, Gol D Roger sits at 35 billion, Edward Newgate the Whitebeard at 34, and Golden Lion Shiki still leads with 38 billion. A hush fell over the officers. Crane, the government's chief warrant officer, leaned forward. 30 billion berries for Rockefeller Charles, then? Sora nodded. That's settled. Issue the new bounties immediately. Crane rose and strode off to finalize the reward orders. With that, the meeting adjourned. Far to the north, beyond the Red Line, the Roger Pirates' flagship cracked through turbulent seas into the fabled New World. No sooner had they dropped anchor than an ambush erupted. Cannon fire roared from unseen ships, and figures darted across smaller vessels flanking them. Are the flying pirates' tentacles already this deep? Captain Roger scoffed as he swept the deck, eyes flashing with excitement. He grabbed a bruised enemy pirate from the melee and lifted him by the collar. Rayleigh, Roger's longtime first mate, stood at his side, watching the other ships emerge from the fog. He frowned. We haven't set foot in the New World for 5 years, Rayleigh said, voice low, but we're already in the heart of someone else's territories. The balance of power here has shifted, drastically. Roger cracked a grin, blood still trickling from a cut on his chin. Then let's remind them who still rules these seas. He turned to his crew. Prepare to push forward. We'll break through any blockade that stands in our way. As the Roger Pirates braced for a ferocious opening strike, Heaven's Gate, the legendary gateway into the New World, loomed behind them, waiting to swallow them once more into its swirling chaos. Now, the New World lay divided into 3 great domains. Lo held the first quarter, Whitebeard, Edward Newgate II, and the Golden Lion Shiji commanded the vast center. Save for a scattering of isles near the Red Earth continent, nearly all territory belonged to Shiji, the undisputed powerhouse of the 3. On the deck of a flying pirate ship, Rayleigh let fly a single, precise strike, and a charging pirate crumpled to the planks. Rayleigh's voice rang out coldly. Fools, if you dare oppose the flying pirates, the Admiral will show you no mercy. Below him, another pirate writhed, pinned fast by Edward Roger's boot. He spat out a defiant curse, but Roger only threw back his head and roared with laughter. Ha! Then let Shiji himself come take us on. With that, Roger gave the man a shove that sent him tumbling into the sea. Fate alone would decide his survival, but fortune favored him for once. He seized a floating plank and drifted off toward a distant island, bobbing on the waves. Far to the north, Golden Lion Shiji perched in his war chamber, reading the latest dispatch. His brow darkened as he muttered, They actually used my own pirates to launch that attack the moment they reached the New World? Have they no respect at all? Headlines blazed across every broadsheet. Roger Pirates enter the New World. Roger Pirates annihilate Air Pirate Squadron. Shiki's lieutenant stared in alarm. Boss Shiki, the Roger Pirates have wiped out half our allied forces off the Red Earth continent. With a roar, Shiki slammed his drink onto the deck. Damn those scoundrels! He'd only just begun to extend his reach into the central islands and kingdoms of the New World, using Charles's voyage as cover, and the infuriating Roger Pirates had blown everything up in his face. Clenching his fists, he bellowed, Recall the fleet at once. Surround them and crush every last one. Right away, sir, his lieutenant replied. Swiftly, he adjusted their formation and put Shiki's new orders into motion. The Golden Lion, Shiki, had thundered into the New World with unmatched ferocity, then inexplicably retreated before even striking a few key islands. His sudden withdrawal left every power in the region bewildered. That confusion lasted only until word spread that the flying pirates' stronghold was ablaze. Instantly, factions across the seas heaved a collective sigh of relief, inwardly thanking Gol D Roger for the turn of events. But amid that collective exhalation came a single, furious bellow. "You slippery dog, Roger! You're not getting away this time!" A marine warship, its figurehead shaped like a snarling hound, closed in fast on the Roger pirate's vessel. At its bow stood Vice Admiral Garp, sleeves rolled up, his arms crackling with explosive shells. Boom, boom, boom. Each shot lit the sky in a staccato flash, the thunderous booms echoing across the water. On the pirate ship's stern, Roger leaned casually against the rail, his massive blade, Ace, slung over one shoulder. With a grin, he swung the sword deftly, slicing through the incoming explosives as if they were nothing more than falling leaves. "Ha! Garp of all people! I'd have thought the Navy had better things to do than chase after me." Garp's reply came in a roar as he unleashed another storm of shells. "Don't you dare mock me, Roger. You sneak off on so-called vacation and leave me to answer to the fleet admiral himself. This ends today. I will not let you slip away." And with that, the chase resumed in earnest, ship against ship, as the sea bore witness to another legendary clash between the Pirate King and the Marine hero. "That mad dog!" Rayleigh stood at Roger's side, his western sword flashing as he deflected each incoming cannonball, gritting his teeth and muttering curses. Roger's hearty laugh rang across the waves. "Ha ha! Let's see if you can catch me!" From the opposite fleet, Admiral Garp's fury thundered louder than any gun, every volley of cannon fire driving him on as both fleets closed to within mere hundreds of meters. They charged straight toward the heart of the New World. On the horizon loomed more than a dozen pirate ships and 3 mysterious floating islands. "Report, Admiral!" A lookout burst into the flying pirate ship's command hall, where Admiral Golgi and his officers were midway through a celebratory drink. "A marine warship is in pursuit of a pirate squad, suspected to be Roger's crew." Golgi's tankard slammed onto the table. "The Roger pirates?" In an instant, the room went deadly silent, then exploded with Golgi's rage. "You heard him. Out there, no mercy. Eliminate every last one of Roger's scoundrels." With a roar, he drew Sakura, the fabled deadwood blade, from his sash. His crew answered the call with a thunderous shout and poured out onto the deck, eager to do battle. The afternoon sky suddenly filled with sails and rigging as the flying pirates descended on Roger's crew. From the stern, Jabba shouted in alarm, abandoning his post to race over to where Roger was dueling Garp. "Captain Roger, look up ahead! It's Golden Lion Shiki's flying fleet." "Shiki, here?" Roger frowned, disbelief coloring his voice. "Did you forget what we did after entering the New World?" Jabba snapped back. Raleigh couldn't suppress an eye roll. "The real Shiki himself. He plundered only a few islands, then brings his entire armada just to surround us?" Roger dashed to the starboard rail and scanned the skies. Dozens of ships hovered overhead, their enormous sails snapping in the wind. At the prow of the lead vessel stood Golden Lion Shiki, twin blades gleaming with frost-white light. His icy glare was fixed squarely on Roger's ship. Roger felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Does he really have to look so murderous? He fell silent, and for once, neither Raleigh nor Jabba could fault him for it. Surrounded by Shiki's fearsome pirates, escape seemed a far cry from a sudden impulse. It was the only sensible plan they had. The flying pirates led the assault, and hot on their heels was Admiral Garp himself, the Navy's mad dog. They were like wolves and tigers from a legend come to life. Rayleigh hurried over to Roger, eyes locked on the chaos ahead. "Roger, come up with an escape plan. Now! This isn't the time to fight. We need to get out of here." Chapter 266, Roger Pirates versus Flying Pirates. "What's the plan?" Roger asked, briefly lowering his head in thought. Then, with a sudden flash in his eyes, he looked up. "We charge straight through. All hands, prepare for battle." He tightened his grip on the sword slung at his waist, the blade known as Ace, and called out to the squadrons of the Golden Lion Shiki's flying fleet hovering before them. But around him, not a single pirate moved. The crew simply stared in stunned silence. "Roger, have you gone mad?" Rayleigh exclaimed, spinning toward him in disbelief. "Mad? Hardly," Roger replied, lifting Ace with a casual flourish. "Our only hope is to shatter their blockade." At those words, Rayleigh spat a plume of smoke from his pipe onto the deck. He drew his own sword with a crash of steel on wood. "Brothers, today we'll carve our return into the annals of the New World." He raised his blade high, its edge catching the dying light, and slammed the flat of his sword against Roger's ace with a thunderous clang. "For glory and freedom." Inspired, the rest of the crew sprang into action. Cutlasses, pistols, and axes were drawn in unison, filling the air with the rasp of steel and the roar of eager voices. Even Shanks and Bucky joined the cry, though a closer look revealed Bucky's knees trembling under the weight of what lay ahead. "Are we really going through with this?" Bucky whispered to Shanks, voice trembling. "Facing down the legendary Roger pirates in open combat?" Shanks grinned, eyes blazing with excitement. "Aye, mate. There's no turning back now." With that, the Roger pirates surged forward, their battle cry echoing across the decks. Ahead of them, Shiki's flying pirates braced for impact, and the thunder of steel against steel rang out like rolling thunder across the sea. Shanks glared across the deck at Bucky and called out, "Don't forget, Roger pirates are one of the 4 emperors. You've got no reason to be afraid." Bucky snorted, tossing back his curly hair. "Afraid of a mangy lion? Please." With that, he sprang to his feet, pride brimming in his eyes. Before anyone could stop him, he sprinted to the bow of the ship and leveled 6 throwing knives at Shiki's incoming flagship. Just then, a shrill, childish voice rang out. "You overgrown furball, think you can bully us?" Every head whipped around. There, standing boldly beside Bucky, was a small boy with wild hair, one hand planted defiantly on his hip as he stared down the golden lion. "Charles," someone shouted from the crew, alarmed by the boy's reckless courage. Shanks's jaw dropped. He knew Bucky was hot-headed, but he'd never expected him to drag a child into this face-off, let alone have the kid hurl insults at Shiki. Leaping forward, Shanks drew his long blade and moved to stand between Charles and the enemy. Across the water, Shiki raised an eyebrow. 2 unruly kids, hair tousled by the wind, stood at the prow of the ship, daring to challenge one of the greatest pirates in the world. A hush fell over both crews as they realized they were witnessing something truly outrageous. Bucky froze on the spot, his forehead slick with cold sweat, legs trembling so violently he feared he'd collapse, and he bit down on his lip to keep from crying out. Around him, the officers of the flying pirates regarded the brave boy Charles standing before them with a mixture of expressions. Some sneered in disdain, others nodded in grudging respect, and a few looked away as if he were beneath notice. Being the focus of so many powerful stares was terrifying. These were legendary lords of the New World, each carrying a bounty in the hundreds of millions of berries. Charles could feel his courage draining away under their scrutiny. Not far off, Vice Admiral Garp, who had been shadowing Roger, noticed his captain suddenly dart toward the bow with urgency. The cannonball in Garp's hand came to an abrupt halt. At that moment, a breathless messenger came racing up and saluted crisply. "Sir, a massive flying fleet off the starboard bow. Captain Golden Lion Shiki is aboard." Garp's jaw tightened. "All hands, battle stations," he ordered, his voice echoing across the deck. "Aye, sir." The messenger saluted again and sprinted away to carry out the command. Chapter 7, The Vice Captain's Challenge. The moment the warship closed in, its crew leapt into action. Every cannon pivoted into firing position, and sailors gripped muskets and cutlasses, eyes locked on Roger's approaching vessel. A hearty, mocking laugh cut through the tense air. "Ha ha ha! Roger, is that the best you've got? Sending only 2 kids forward?" High above the rolling deck, a lone figure hovered, arms folded, as he looked down. "Long time no see, Vice Captain Shiki." Roger called up to him. Without missing a beat, Gol D Roger sprang from the stern of his ship. He landed beside his 2 youngest crew members, Buggy and Shanks, in a single fluid motion. His wild hair bristled like whiskers, and a cocky grin spread across his face. Though he smiled, his hand never strayed far from the hilt of his knife. Shiki, the fearsome vice captain, peered down with cool disdain. From the shadow of Roger's deck, Silvers, Rayleigh, and Jabra thundered forward in support. Roger's eyes flicked to them, then back at Shiki. In one swift motion, he scooped Buggy and Shanks up by the collars and flung them behind him. "Take cover and stay alert," he barked, planting himself squarely between his friends and the floating pirate lord. "It's the vice captain," Shanks shouted, puffing out his young chest and standing his ground. Buggy, however, remained frozen. His knees trembled uncontrollably, and a trickle of snot dropped from his nose as he stared up at Shiki in wide-eyed shock. Charles shot a glance at Bucky, but said nothing, then narrowed his eyes at the flying pirates swooping in overhead. "Roger, the situation's gone bad. The 13 captains are here, and they've all deployed." He leaned close to whisper into Roger's ear. Roger gave a subtle nod in response. Shiki clenched his twin blades, stepping forward with a furious glare. "Explain yourself, Roger," he demanded. "Right now." Roger feigned innocence, blinking up at Shiki with a vacant expression. That only fueled Shiki's anger. "You think this is a game," he spat. "I'll beat an answer out of you." With a roar, Shiki vaulted into the air. "Try dodging this." He spun mid-flight and swung both swords in a deadly arc, sending 2 shimmering slashes hurtling toward Roger. Roger didn't flinch. He whipped out his greatsword, Ace, and met Shiki's attack in a single thunderous clash, steel on steel, sparking against steel. Instantly, the other captains sprang into action. Their ships rocked as each leader dove into combat, crews flooding the decks in a chaotic torrent of blades and gunfire. Airships rattled with cannon blasts while fighters darted between rigging and sails. In the midst of the carnage, Charles steadied his grip on his sword, eyes steely with resolve. The sky trembled with the roar of battle, and he knew there was no turning back. The fight for survival had begun. Fire! At Captain Shiji's command, the Golden Lion's fleet unleashed a thunderous barrage against Roger's flagship. 13 pirate ships opened fire in unison, and for a moment, Roger's crew was caught completely off guard. Cannonballs screamed through the air, threatening to rip the decks to splinters. Quick to react, Raleigh and Jabba hefted their own cannons and blew incoming shots skyward, trying to shield the ship from devastation. But the enemy's assault showed no sign of relenting. Wave after wave of iron thunderbolts crashed down. Irritated by the relentless bombardment, Jabba hefted his twin axes and charged toward one of the hostile vessels. "Open the sky!" he roared, swinging both blades in a single savage arc. Before the ship's captain could flinch, his body began to swell and shift. In less than a heartbeat, he transformed into a colossal black bear. "Hold him off!" The bear's roar echoed across the water as a ripple of armament Haki coated his massive form. He slammed his paw down to block Abba's strike. Clang! The axes met armored flesh with a metallic screech. The impact sheared away a 10-meter section of the deck before the bear's limb finally came to rest, firmly halting Jabba's blow. The battle had only just begun. "Call!" The massive black bear inhaled deeply, then exhaled a gust of frosty white vapor from its nostrils. Chapter 267, Roger vs. Ski, blocked. Jabba flashed a savage grin, the shallow cuts on his forearms glinting as he flexed his massive fists. "Devil fruit power, baby," he muttered to himself, half amused, half exasperated. "Heh! I'm doomed, aren't I?" Across the deck, Bucky careened in panic, arms flailing, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm going to die. I just know I am." "Come on, Bucky. Show some of the guts you had before," Shanks yelled, his blood-red hair whipping in the sea breeze as he brandished his long knife and scanned the horizon for the next volley. At Shanks's shout, Bucky snapped out of his frenzy. "Shanks! Don't you go acting like my teacher!" Bang! Before either of them could react, Rayleigh materialized behind them, landing a solid punch on each. "Knock it off, both of you." "Humph!" Bucky and Shanks snorted in unison, turning away in stubborn silence. Rayleigh paid them no heed. With a single fluid motion, he drew his gleaming sword and began slicing the descending cannonballs out of the sky. Each arc of his blade sent iron shells splintering harmlessly into the ocean. "Quickly now, protect the ship," he roared above the chaos. "These pirates refuse to face us head-on. They're playing with long-range bombardment instead of swordplay. Who taught them such underhanded tricks?" Raleigh clenched his fists in silent frustration. On the bow of the sea god Poseidon, Charles, leaning against the rail at the edge of the windlass belt, suddenly sneezed twice, rubbing his reddened nose. Tianue, seated nearby, sprang up with a thick blanket. "It's colder here than it seems. Wrap yourself up before you catch a chill." Charles accepted the blanket with a grateful smile, the warmth easing into his shoulders. He gazed out at the phenomenon before him. On their side, the sea heaved and roared. Just beyond that boundary, the water lay mirror calm. "Isn't it strange?" he murmured. "Where we stand, it's almost a storm, but on the other side, complete stillness." Tianyu arched an eyebrow. "You really intend to sail straight into the windless belt? Every captain I know avoids it like the plague." Charles tapped the rail in quiet resolve. "Prepare the crew. We're cutting through this belt and heading into the North Sea." "Aye, sir." The sailors dispersed, shouting orders and scurrying to secure lines and ready the helm. Undeterred by the turbulent waves at their stern, the sea god Poseidon pressed on toward the deceptive calm ahead. A hush fell over the deck. Rumors of the windless belt's dangers had long circulated among mariners. Yet Charles had always believed that fortune favors the bold, and nothing would stop him from breaching this eerie frontier. There was a 90% chance of death in the calm belt. Almost no one made it through alive, except for the crew of Jew Snake Island, who'd somehow mastered passage through that windless expanse. No other ship had ever breached the dead zone. That's what made Charles's decision so astonishing. Without his ironclad guarantee of success, no captain in their right mind would have dared attempt it. Earlier, in the first half of the New World, Vice Admiral Garp hovered on the fringe of a fierce sky battle. From his vantage point, he could see Gol D Roger's fleet locked in combat with Shiki the Golden Lion's airborne pirate armada. Garp's boiled blood struggled with his orders as he watched Roger himself hard-pressed by Shiki's ferocious onslaught. Ships buzzed overhead like angry hornets. Seawater swirled unnaturally around the duelists, Shiki's devil fruit power at work, bending the ocean to his will. Roger found himself at a severe disadvantage. Though he wielded his sword with unrivaled skill, he was hemmed in by Shiki's ability to float free of gravity and to command water as if it were flesh. Sea spray gathered around Shiki's feet as he raised his voice in a challenge. "Sea lion rampage," he bellowed. With that roar, gargantuan lions made of pure seawater lunged at Roger, claws bared and jaws snapping. Each roaring beast barreled straight for their quarry. Roger didn't hesitate. He drew both blades, their steel gleaming with a golden sheen as he met the charge. In one fluid arc, he cleaved through the foremost water lion, sending a cascade of droplets scattering like rain. Unfazed, Shiki roared again. "Golden Lion, roar!" More massive, liquid-forged lions surged forward. Shiki leaped into the air, floating above the deck, his twin swords dancing in a deadly display. Roger raised his blades in response. With a controlled spin, he sent out a series of golden slashes that struck Shiki squarely, shattering the water lions into a fine mist that fell around them like applause. As the mist cleared, neither man backed down. In the swirling ether of salt and steel, the two legends prepared for the next strike, each determined to prove his supremacy in this sky-born battlefield. Charles barely managed to bring up his blade in time to block Shiji's lightning-fast strike. But matching the Golden Lion's legendary speed was no small feat. Their weapons met in mid-air with a series of thunderous clashes. Dang, dang, dang! Each blow rippling through the swirling clouds and splitting them in two. The shockwave knocked a newspaper hawker aloft. Startled, he flapped his makeshift wings and drew his head down into his cloak for safety. Below, Admiral Garp stared up at the airborne skirmish and spotted the hawker's chest, right where a tiny video bug was broadcasting every moment. "Damn Morgans," Garp growled, hammering his fist against the ship's railing. With that feed live on air, there was no way he could leap in to help Charles. He'd be exposing his own position in an instant. All he could do was stand by and watch. Meanwhile, on a remote island deep in the New World, the media magnate Morgans leaned forward in his swivel chair, eyes glued to the real-time footage. "See?" he chuckled. "I told you sending a cloud-riding press card after the Golden Lion would pay off. This is the scoop of the century." His triumphant smile froze as the screen flickered. Something was happening, something he hadn't anticipated. Morgans's grin faded, replaced by a sharp, uneasy whisper. "No. From now on, they won't just plant audio bugs on the Golden Lion Shiki. They're going to attach live video transmitters to Whitebeard, Charles, and Roger as well, streaming their every move in real time." Morgan's eyes lit up. Who cared if the Navy approved or not? Boss, are you saying the Marines really plan to plant bugs on them? The editor, watching Morgans get more and more excited, snapped back. You idiot. Do you think your boss didn't die fast enough? Or are you angling to inherit his chair so you can join him 6 feet under? At that, Morgan's fist shot out before he even realized it, catching the editor square in the jaw. Sure, the pirates might be furious, but at worst, he'd have to lie low for a while. Still, if the world government was truly pressing the issue, it could become a nightmare. He couldn't keep relocating his entire news agency every other day, and the idea of CP0 eyeballing his operation non-stop was enough to give him gray hairs. Not that he underestimated the government's reach. His paper only dealt in small-time scoops, nothing that touched the heart of their power. But surveillance like this, it would strangle his business before it even got started. No news agency, not even Morgan's News, could afford the price for these photographs. The moment Morgan's mentioned the fee, everyone fell silent, their eyes fixed on the image the street vendor had just revealed. What had once been a calm sea now churned violently under the weight of the battle playing out on the horizon. Amidst the chaos, nobody noticed the lone skiff slicing through the swells until it was almost upon them. Standing tall in a flowing purple coat, Charles surveyed the distant clash with cool detachment. Every thunderous impact sent tremors through his tiny vessel, but a slow, calculating smile curved his lips. Fascinating, he murmured. Looks like we've got ourselves a real spectacle. Far ahead, two adversaries traded blows so fierce it seemed the sky itself might split in two. Just beyond them, a massive warship hovered, its dark hull exuding an unmistakable aura of menace. Charles's eyes glittered as he took in the scene. Roger pirates versus air pirates, and Vice Admiral Garp thrown into the mix, he said, his voice laced with anticipation. Now that's a battle worth watching. He planted his feet firmly on the deck and folded his arms, ready to savor every moment of the high-sea showdown unfolding before him. Charles guided his skiff straight into the fray, heedless of the roaring waves and the smoldering wreckage littering the sea. Focusing all his strength, he thrust his crimson blade forward and roared, "Crimson Slash!" Chapter 268, The Unexpected Arrival of the Red Earl. Crimson Slash! A vivid scarlet arc tore through the misty sea air and hurtled straight for the heart of the battlefield. Roger and Shiji spun in unison, spotting the blazing slash racing toward them. "Who?" Roger murmured, brow furrowed. With a thunderous roar, Shiji, his golden mane whipping in the wind, gathered sword chi and lunged forward to meet the attack. He hated nothing more than an interruption when he was locked in combat. Roger narrowed his eyes, studying the distant glow. There was power in that blow, raw and unrestrained, power that rivaled his own. Friend or foe, he couldn't tell. A swordsman's strike of the highest order. In Roger's mind, only one man could have unleashed such a slash, Rockefeller Charles. Yet even after their single encounter, Charles's unmistakable aura should have registered. And here, oddly, there was no trace of it. Shiji's crimson-tipped blade collided with the incoming slash in a brilliant flash. A shockwave rippled across the waves, scattering spray into the air. And then, silence. Both attacks dissolved, leaving nothing but the faint echo of clashing steel. Roger and Shiji stood at the ready, eyes fixed on the spot where the crimson light had vanished. Tension crackled on the breeze as they waited. Who had just made that explosive entrance? And did this unexpected strike herald the arrival of the fabled Red Earl? A lone skiff drifted across the open sea, its single passenger standing firm on deck with an umbrella raised against the spray. From the warship's rail, Shike narrowed his eyes at the purple-clad figure. The man's face was unfamiliar, yet there was something strangely recognizable about him, as if he'd crossed his path before. Roger, too, felt the tug of that half-remembered impression. Even Garp, stationed at the bow, frowned at the intruder. No sailor in their navy would approach unannounced like this. The only conclusion left was that he was a pirate. On the skiff, the Red Earl Patrick Redfield tilted his umbrella and surveyed the 3 warship officers staring back at him. A slow smile spread across his lips. It had been ages since anyone so strong had caught his attention, and the sense of recognition stirred memories of his meeting with Charles 6 years earlier. "Boy, who are you?" Shike demanded, his tone sharp with suspicion. Patrick lifted an eyebrow but did not rush. From inside his coat, he produced a slightly crumpled parchment and held it aloft. "Patrick Redfield," he announced evenly. "The Red Earl." Patrick Redfield stepped forward and drew out an old parchment. 6 years had passed since it was issued. He cleared his throat and announced, "Bounty, 1.08 billion berries." A stunned hush fell over the room. Roger's eyes went wide. Shike, hovering just behind him, let out a low whistle. Even Captain Garp's stern face broke into a frown. A billion-berry bounty was no small change. Garp's mind raced back to 6 years ago, when a reckless boy had stormed through the world government's secret pathways, cutting down Marine patrols in his wake. CP0 had thrown everything they had at him, yet he'd vanished into the new world without a trace. Now, after years of rumors, the prodigal youth had reemerged, and clearly, he'd grown far stronger than anyone had dared imagine. "Patrick Redfield," Garp rumbled, stepping forward. His gravelly voice betrayed a mix of shock and respect. Shike tapped his chin thoughtfully, then his eyes lit up. "Wait, I remember you telling me about him," he burst out. "His name is Charles. 6 years ago, he was already incredible. If he's improved this much, watch out." Patrick, known in some circles as the Red Earl, smiled faintly, his crimson coat glinting in the lantern light. "The rumors were true," he said softly. "Charles has returned. It's been a while, hasn't it?" The Red Earl's voice carried a fondness he couldn't hide. Though it had been less than 2 days since his last encounter with Charles, those 48 hours had left a lasting impression. Testing skills, side by side, clinking glasses in a final drinking contest, and that wildly embarrassing moment when he'd been unexpectedly captured by the slave team, he would never forget it. "Boy," the Earl sneered, "you may claim friendship with Charles, but you had the audacity to barge into my duel. You dishonor him, and now you'll pay for it. Die!" Shiji's eyes narrowed. Without another word, he surged forward, twin blades crossing above his head like a pair of sharpened awls. The Red Earl simply smiled, tucked his parasol under one arm, and with a fluid motion revealed its steel-reinforced tip. In an instant, the parasol slammed toward Shiji's ribs. Clang! Steel rang against steel, and shockwaves of force rippled down both fighters' arms. Each felt the weight and power behind the other's strike. The Red Earl's smile faltered for the briefest moment as he studied his opponent's unwavering gaze. Shike's laughter boomed over the roiling sea. "Ha ha 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 ha! With that puny strength, boy, you're asking to die!" The instant he spoke, Shike's aura exploded outward. The once placid waters surged into towering waves as golden lightning crackled and spiraled around him, radiating an overwhelming, kingly dominance. Across from him, the Red Earl's own arrogance flared in reply. His form shimmered in a majestic blend of crimson and purple, and a fierce red-purple lightning bolt snaked toward Shike's golden lion manifestation. "Not bad," the Red Earl growled, smashing his umbrella blade forward. "You truly bear the blood of a king. No wonder Charles calls you a formidable opponent, but that alone bores me." With twin swords crackling like thunderclouds, Shike unleashed a blinding arc of golden lightning. The Red Earl countered in kind, channeling overlordly violet-red bolts through his umbrella. Golden and crimson energies met in midair with a cataclysmic shockwave, thunder rolling across the turbulent sea as light and shadow clashed in a dazzling, world-shaking explosion. The entire crew of the Roger pirates watched the duel with grave expressions. "Captain," Raleigh called out, waving an old dossier. "I've identified our newcomer. He's the same man who hacked into the world government's secure channels 6 years ago. No one's heard a word since. I always assumed they'd executed him in secret. I never imagined we'd run into him here." Roger took the yellowed file and scanned it with narrowed eyes. Then he lifted his head, a sly grin curling at his lips as he glanced over at the Red Earl's side. "Well, well," he murmured, "another formidable adversary." He turned to Raleigh. "While they're locked in combat, why don't we make our move? Catch them off guard." Raleigh's face went pale. "No, Captain. If we interfere now, we'll put the Red Earl in mortal peril. I can't let that happen." Roger waved off his protest with a dismissive shake of the head. Raleigh fell silent, his shoulders slumping. At that moment, the clash of steel rang out louder than ever, clang, clang, as Ski and the Red Earl unleashed a furious barrage of swordplay. Each strike carried a weight and speed that made the air shimmer. Neither man offered an inch. They traded blows so fast that most of the crew could barely track the blade's movements. A tense hush fell over the deck, broken only by the rhythmic clash of metal. Then, just for a heartbeat, someone on the sidelines let out a low, triumphant laugh. Ha! It echoed ominously, reminding everyone that in this world, a single misstep could mean the difference between glory and ruin. "You must be the Red Earl, Patrick Redfield," Shike said, lowering his blade just enough to signal a temporary ceasefire. "Well fought. I acknowledge your skill." He took a measured step back, but his eyes never left the Roger pirates arrayed before him. His feint had been no accident, merely a probe to test their reactions and strength. Gone was the impassive calm that had marked Patrick Redfield a moment ago. Now his expression was unreadable, all tension and concentrated purpose as he prepared for whatever Shike might do next. Chapter 269, Garp versus the Red Earl. I'd spent 6 years holed up on that mountaintop, pushing myself to the limit using Charles's method. I was certain I'd emerge invincible. Instead, I learned the hard way what it meant to face the golden lion, Shiki. He soundly defeated me. As I drifted in midair, dazed from the impact, a skeletal figure floated up beside me. He stretched out a bony hand and called, "Kid, you've got raw power. Ever thought about joining the Flying Pirates? I'll make you my vice captain." At those words, I felt a flicker of amusement through my fatigue. I straightened, fixing him with a steady gaze. "I'm flattered, but you're the second person to offer me that exact position." The skeleton pirate's brows rose. "Oh, and who was the first?" I let a slow smile spread across my face. "You know him, Charles Rockefeller. He asked me to be his vice captain 6 years ago. I turned him down." Silence stretched between us for a heartbeat. Then the skeleton pirate's lips curled into a grin. Without saying another word, he flipped open the umbrella he carried and deftly twisted it into the shape of a blossoming flower. The challenge hung in the air. Who would bend and who would break first? "That's right," Charles declared, his eyes locked on the Crimson Earl. Patrick Redfield met his gaze coolly. "Ha!" Redfield laughed, a rich, mocking sound. "You're only the second person bold enough to refuse me. The first was Charles himself." Charles's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Redfield's expression flickered with annoyance. "Don't regret this, and don't get in my way," he warned, voice low and dangerous. Without waiting for a reply, Charles stepped back, choosing not to engage Redfield directly, for now. Instead, he turned to Roger, who had been watching the exchange. "Roger, our score isn't settled yet. Let's finish this." With a burst of speed, Charles leapt forward, reigniting their fierce duel. On the flagship's bridge, Vice Admiral Garp slammed a fist against the rail. "Quickly, bring the warship about. I want Patrick Redfield in our nets," he barked to his aide. Within moments, the Admiral's ship veered toward the Crimson Earl's vessel. From the deck of his ship, Redfield curved his lips into a small, intrigued smile. "Interesting," he murmured, eyes glinting as the chase began. The Red Earl's lips curved into a faint, amused smile as he regarded the newcomer. "Naval hero Garp," he drawled, voice dripping with contempt. "A mere vice admiral dares to come here and die." Vice Admiral Garp chuckled, rolling his shoulders back as he steadied himself on the ship's deck. "Pirate, stand and face me. Take a punch from this old man." His eyes gleamed with excitement. Disdain flickered in the Red Earl's gaze. He didn't so much as shift his feet. In his hand, he twirled his ornate umbrella, and in an instant, its ribs erupted into a shimmering, lethal framework. Unfazed, Garp lunged forward in one powerful bound. He barely registered the deck cracking beneath his boot as he launched into his signature attack. "Fistbone meteorite," he bellowed. The moment his steel-hard fist met the Red Earl's umbrella, a thunderous clang split the air. Sparks danced along the umbrella's spokes as Garp's blow threatened to split it in two. For a heartbeat, Garp's wide grin and fierce resolve were directly before him, so close it was almost mocking. Yet the Red Earl's face remained calm. Only now the amusement had drained away, replaced by something colder. A lieutenant general's punch should never have landed like that. And whatever this Garp was capable of, the Red Earl knew he'd underestimated him at his peril. A crimson spray burst from the Red Earl's mouth as he was blasted clear off the deck. His body arched through the air like a wild stallion before crashing onto the rolling waves. He skimmed across the water's surface for a heartbeat, then plunged under. From the spot where the Earl had stood, Vice Admiral Garp remained calmly planted on the deck, watching the sea churn. To everyone's shock, the Red Earl suddenly burst back above the waves, blood still at the corner of his mouth. "How can a mere Vice Admiral be so powerful?" the Red Earl gasped, clutching his chest. Each breath felt as if his very organs were rattling. Garp simply scratched his head and grinned, playing the fool. "Huh? Beats me." The incredulous Earl struggled to find words. "With strength like yours, why haven't you been promoted to full admiral?" "Oh, they did offer," Garp replied with a chuckle. "But I thought it'd be too much hassle, so I turned it down." At that, the Red Earl couldn't contain himself. He coughed violently, and a fresh fountain of blood spattered across the deck. Hands pressed to his chest, he sank back into the water, utterly defeated by the absurdity of it all. Refuse the Admiral? There are still people who dare defy him. The Red Earl spat blood from the corner of his mouth, glaring at Vice Admiral Garp in disbelief. "How dare you? They've openly rejected the Admiral's authority. Yet you, pirate, you insist on returning to headquarters today. Your orders are clear. Bring the old man in, then advance straight to the city." Garp cracked a grin. He had no patience for the Red Earl's theatrics. Bracing himself, he lunged forward like a human cannonball, aiming to take his opponent down before the Earl could recover. The Red Earl, his uniform torn and his face smeared with blood, wouldn't back down. He clenched his teeth, met Garp's charge head-on, and threw himself into the clash. Neither man gave an inch, the Earl's reckless abandon against Garp's ironclad resolve. All around them, the battle had reached a fever pitch. The Roger pirates threw thunderous blows against the air pirates overhead. Below, Admiral Ski's fleet engaged in a brutal exchange of cannon fire. And here, on this blood-soaked deck, it was Garp versus the Red Earl in a clash of titans. Above the roar of artillery and the cries of wounded men, Garp barked into his shell phone. "Moses, is that Navy headquarters? This is Vice Admiral Garp's flagship. Come in." Silence answered him, only the distant crack of cannons echoing across the sea. But Garp trusted his own strength more than any reply. With a final roar, he tightened his grip and prepared to end this duel once and for all. Lieutenant Commander Morgan burst into the command center, saluting sharply. "Admiral, we've just encountered an enormous pirate armada, Gol D Roger's crew, the Flying Pirates under Shiki the Golden Lion, and the notorious red-eared Earl Patrick Lay, who's been plaguing us for the last 6 years. Reports from Durfield confirm that Roger's men are locked in brutal combat with the Flying Pirates, while Vice Admiral Garp is fiercely engaged with Patrick Lay. The situation is critical. We need immediate reinforcements from Marine headquarters." The announcement sent a ripple through the entire base. Fleet Admiral Vander slammed his fist on the console and hit the alarm. Alarms wailed through every corridor as all senior officers hurried into the war room. Admiral Kong stood at the head of the long table, arms crossed. When the last officer took their seat, he rapped twice on the tabletop. "Give me the full status." Morgan cleared his throat and continued, "Sir, during the pursuit of Gol D Roger, Garp unexpectedly ran into Shiki, known to many as the Golden Lion. Contrary to initial reports, Shiki did not join forces with Roger to besiege Garp. Instead, the two pirate captains are battling each other head-on." A murmur of astonishment spread around the table. Rear Admiral Hayes slammed his fist down. "Then we must dispatch a relief fleet at once. Garp's outnumbered. He can't hold them off alone." Admiral Kong raised a hand for silence. His face was grave. "Hold that order. Shiki commands one of the most fearsome pirate fleets in the New World. If he's out for Roger, it could tip the balance of power in the seas. Prepare every ship on standby, but don't launch until we've gathered precise intelligence on Shiki's position and force strength. Understood?" "Yes, Admiral," the Rumia. Kong leaned forward. "This is no ordinary rescue mission. We convene again in 2 hours with detailed battle maps. Until then, no fleet sails without my direct command." He dismissed the officers with a nod, already turning over scenarios in his mind. The fate of Vice Admiral Garp, and perhaps the entire Grand Line, hung in the balance. "I'd be glad to help, but I'll need the full chapter text to produce a complete, polished rewrite. Could you please provide the entire chapter so I can revise it into coherent, idiomatic English?" Chapter 270, The Crazy Shiji. "Doesn't this mean our Navy will profit from the fishing fleet?" someone blurted, eyes alight with greed as they stared at the sky. I groaned inwardly. Could they at least let me finish? Hold on. I haven't even told you the whole story yet. Please calm down. With a firm rap on the table, Marshal Sora restored order. The assembled officers sat up straight, eager for his next words. Roger and Shaik's duel was indeed fierce, Sora began, but it didn't last. Before either could claim victory, a third party crashed the fight and turned the tide. A murmur rippled through the room. Sora turned to Commander Kong and said, "Kong, do you remember Patrick Redfield, the Red Earl who battled Charles in Water City 6 years ago and then slipped into the New World via that secret world government passage?" Kong's brow furrowed. "You mean the swordsman who went toe-to-toe with Charles?" Sora nodded gravely. "The very same. It was Redfield who intervened." Surprise and excitement flickered across every face. Sensing the tension, Kong stood, retrieved a stack of reports, and passed them to First Staff Officer Crane. "These are the latest intelligence on the Red Earl's movements," Kong announced, voice low but urgent. As Crane began distributing the documents, the room filled with whispered speculations, everyone trying to grasp the implications of this legendary swordsman's return. A fresh reward bulletin had just lit up every naval outpost. Want Patrick Redfield, the Red Earl. 6 years ago, Admiral Crane began, as he turned to face his assembled officers, at the Battle of Water Capital. Charles Rockefeller first encountered this man. Not long afterward, Redfield stormed the world government's most secure channel, shattering an 800-year record, and instantly became infamous across the globe. Then CP0 was dispatched to hunt him down. He vanished without a trace, and for the past 6 years rumors swirled that he died of his injuries or been quietly executed. No one expected him to reappear, until Vice Admiral Garp crossed paths with him. A hush fell over the room as the high-ranking officers absorbed the dossier in their hands. Another S-class pirate had emerged, and he was already engaging one of the Marine's greatest heroes. As Crane has said, Admiral Kong took over, voice grave. "The Red Earl's return caught us unprepared. Garp and Redfield are locked in stalemate at sea, and I fear it could turn disastrous. That is why I have summoned you. We need your best strategies to regain the upper hand." Captain Kong swept his gaze across the assembly, then straightened and called out, "Marshal! Immediately dispatch Admiral Sengoku, who's stationed in the New World, for support. Maybe then we can trap them all," Crane ordered, his tone sharp and unyielding. Commander Sora exchanged a glance with him and nodded. "Understood, but I worry about sending the Warring States unit in alone. You'll come too, right? Make sure none of those pirates slip away." Admiral Kong turned to the lieutenants assembled in the room. "You heard the orders." At once, the Navy lieutenants rose and hurried out of the conference chamber toward the docks. Their sudden movement drew every onlooker's attention. Everyone knew the Navy headquarters was mounting a major operation in the New World. Elsewhere on the high seas, "Ahem! Vice Admiral Garp!" shouted the Red Earl from the deck of a pirate sky galleon. With a swift flick of his umbrella, he sent the meddlesome sky pirates tumbling overboard, then smirked at Garp's ship looming nearby. Garp's lips curled into a confident grin. "Trying to flee, kid? Prepare to feel an old man's iron fist." Before the Red Earl could react, Garp darted forward like a cannonball, closing the distance in an instant. The pirate's cool expression wavered as he realized this was no ordinary attack. Blood streamed down Charles's face as he lashed out with his sword, but a blur of pitch-black fists sent him sprawling. The Red Earl, brimming with grief and indignation, slammed his umbrella onto Charles's head, only to have Charles deflect it with a solid punch. Still, the assault didn't let up. Each blow lacked raw power, but their blistering speed more than compensated, shredding Charles's new coat to tatters. "Damn, pirate! Those were brand new clothes! You'll pay for this!" Charles roared, staring at the ruined fabric hanging from his shoulders. The corners of the Red Earl's eyes twitched. What kind of monster could absorb a strike like that? If the coat hadn't torn, he'd have thought he'd hit nothing at all. Charles, sensing his opponent's surprise, squared his shoulders and pressed his advantage. His fists, now crackling with an inky, jet-black aura, descended like a relentless downpour. Every time he connected, purple bruises bloomed across the Red Earl's flesh. "How hateful!" the Red Earl snarled, wrapping his umbrella in the same dark energy. The two forces met with a thunderous crack. Charles's empowered fists crashing against the umbrella's unyielding defense, sending shockwaves rippling through the night air. The gap between them was vast, but neither showed any sign of yielding under the impact. Charles pressed himself against the rail of the flying pirate's flagship, dazed by the aftershock of the mighty clash between the red-haired pirate and Admiral Garp. The sheer force of their battle had sent dozens of his crewmates sprawling across the deck. They were lucky, he thought grimly. Shiki's fleet had already lost half its support ships in the fight. On the quarterdeck, Golden Lion Shiki's eyes burned with fury. "Get out of here," he bellowed. "Take your fight off my ship." Snarling, Shiki lunged at Roger and Garp with a savage slash. His blade, crackling with pent-up rage, carved through the air. For a heartbeat, the red-haired pirate and the admiral staggered apart. Then Roger snapped open his iron-tipped umbrella to parry the blow, while Garp's massive fist cut in from the side. Steel and iron met in a deafening clash, and Shiki's sword shattered under the combined force, splintering across the planks. Before he could recover, Roger and Garp surged forward in unison. Shiki braced himself, fury turning to disbelief. "You two, why are you ganging up on me?" he roared, spinning his remaining blade in a wild arc. The deck erupted into chaos. Shiki's desperate flurry cut through friend and foe alike as terrified pirates scrambled to clear a path. Charles stumbled back, heart pounding, watching the Golden Lion pelt his own crew with indiscriminate blows. On a nearby marine warship, hundreds of sailors froze as they spotted a titanic slash aimed straight for their hull. Garp, sweat and fury mingling on his brow, roared an order over the ringing steel. "Fall back! Clear the decks! Retreat!" Amid the cacophony of crashing wood and panicked shouts, Charles realized the battle had reached a breaking point. The clash of legends threatened to consume them all unless someone could bring it to an end. Charles stood at the edge of the courtyard, his pulse racing as Admiral Garp squared off against the Red Earl. The air crackled with tension. "Are you underestimating me?" the Red Earl growled, eyeing Garp's bruised knuckles. He hefted his cane umbrella in one hand, wondering if there was some hidden power in Garp's fists. After all, he wasn't a devil fruit user, yet he'd left bruises on the Earl's ribs. "Bastard! Get out of my sight, old man!" Garp snarled, his pride stung. In an instant, Garp's eyes blazed and he lunged forward, fist cocked. "Galaxy impact!" he bellowed. A shockwave rippled outward so suddenly that the Red Earl barely managed to raise his umbrella as a shield. "Crimson shock!" the Earl retaliated, sweeping his umbrella in a slash of deep red energy. Gold and violet arcs of force collided between them, throwing up sparks and forcing each man to dig in his heels. Seizing the momentary standoff, Garp activated his moonstep, vaulting himself through the air toward the Earl's weapon. "Iron block!" he yelled. Garp's entire body tightened like forged steel against the Red Earl's furious strike. Their weapons of raw strength and energy met with a deafening clang-clang, echoing across the courtyard. Charles's breath caught as the two adversaries locked horns, each testing the other's limits. Neither gave an inch. Each strike, each parry, carried the weight of their pride and power. It was a clash that would be spoken of for years to come. "Lieutenant General Garp!" The sailors' alarmed shouts rang out as the smoke on the deck finally cleared. There, sprawled in a growing pool of blood, lay Garp, his chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. With a savage roar, Garp slammed his boot into the wooden planks. The deck cracked and splintered under his force, sending a jagged hole fanning out toward the waiting Shiji. Unfazed by the general's reputation or by the rank emblazoned on his uniform, Shiji's eyes blazed with fury. He hefted his sword and sprang forward, determined to end the fight before Garp could strike again. Chapter 271. Ha! "Everyone loves to pick on me, right? Then come at me. Let's see who survives till the end." Shike cackled as he tangled with Captain Roger and Admiral Garp in midair, grinning madly for reasons no one could fathom. Last time, his former captain Locke had stepped in and let Garp and Roger handle him, but this time it was Locke's turn to watch and lose confidence. On the battered deck of the derelict ship, the Red Earl stared up at the three combatants whirling through the sky. Is this their greatest battle? Could it compare to what Charles, the boy whose fame rivals theirs, might unleash? The Red Earl had come out to sea to honor an agreement made 6 years ago, only to discover that while he'd grown stronger, so had his rivals. A cold dread settled over him. He would rather die than fall any further behind. "Die, die, die!" Shike roared, spinning his twin blades in a furious dance. Each slash unleashed razor-sharp chi that rained down like a shower of silver coins. Garp and Roger could do little but brace themselves against the relentless onslaught. In these skies, Shike held the advantage. His fluttering fruit power let him soar freely, while his opponents were forced to walk on the air itself whenever they tried to close in. The Red Earl's heart hammered in his chest. Even after 6 years of cultivation, could he ever match these airborne legends, or would this be the moment he finally fell? "You've lost your mind," Roger spat, staring at his once proud mustache, now torn clean down the middle. This madman was even crazier than rocks. Across the deck, Vice Admiral Garp met the outlaw's blade with a single thunderous blow of his fist, shattering steel like dry bamboo. Even Garp grunted under the force. This opponent was not to be underestimated. A lookout's alarm rang out from the crow's nest. "Captain, enemy fleet off the starboard bow." Through the morning haze, Roger and Garp made out 7 colossal warships, each nearly 60 meters long and bristling with cannon muzzles. One by one, heavy guns were pushed out of their ports, ready to fire. On the lead ship's deck, a scout in a green robe dashed to report to a looming figure. Towering over 5 meters tall, the man's broad forehead jutted like an awl. But the most striking feature was the jagged scar slicing from his scalp down to his chest. "This chaos is our golden opportunity," the giant roared, laughter booming across the waves. "All hands, descend on them and plunder everything in sight." Recognition flashed in Roger's eyes. This was Green Pepper, the pirate whom Charles had knocked out cold 5 years ago. After Charles had spared his life, Pepper vanished into the New World, only to reappear now at the head of this fearsome fleet. The two sides tensed, steel clashing against steel, as the first cannons thundered and the true battle began. Because Charles had delivered that crushing lesson, he hadn't dared tangle with any of the great powers for the last 5 years. Instead, he'd spent his time leading the 8 Treasures Navy, always picking off the weakest prey and never tasting defeat. What began as a handful of ships in the New World has grown into a fleet rivaling 8 pirate squadrons, with thousands of men under his black flag. Charles himself has become a name to watch, yet he's never carved out a territory of his own. He strikes fast, pockets the spoils, and vanishes before anyone can strike back. A tactic that keeps heavyweights like Jin Shi from ever giving him serious notice. "Bring her in tight," Charles bellowed. "Today we'll plunder the flames." At his command, the 8 treasure sailors raised cutlasses and harpoons, howling with excitement. Looting smoldering wrecks was one of their favorite spectacles. As their ship closed the gap, the distant battlefield came into sharp relief. Shattered masts, shredded sails, and drifting planks scattered by the tide. Green Pepper, normally as cool as sea mist, stood anxiously at the bow, eyes flicking over the devastation. "Captain," he called, voice tense, "it's them, Leaden Lion Shiki and Brother D, captain of the Roger Pirates." Chapter X, Unexpected Allies, Roger and the legendary Vice Admiral Garp and a strange young man. Qingjiao froze, his eyes darting among the 4 figures arrayed before him. A twinge of guilt knotted in his chest. How had his little raid gone so horribly off course? On the horizon, another fleet bore down, catching the sharp gaze of the Red Earl. He studied the black Jolly Roger flying high on the lead ship and immediately dismissed the notion of marine reinforcements. No naval force could appear so quickly. Confident in his judgment, he turned back to his own duel, oblivious to the newcomers. Around him, 3 fierce battles erupted at once. A Roger pirate engaged his namesake captain in a deadly dance. Vice Admiral Garp traded thunderous blows with the fearsome rocks, and the mysterious youth, whom Qingjiao's crew had nicknamed Green Pepper, stepped into the fray. With a single fluid motion, Green Pepper clashed steel with the Roger man, sparks flying in the noonday sun. Cold sweat trickled down Qingjiao's back. Only hours ago, he'd helped sack one of Golden Lion Shiki's strongholds in the New World. Now the legendary Shiki stood before him, flanked by 2 of the world's greatest fighters, and an unpredictable newcomer. His men, unaware of the titles and terrors they faced, continued to press forward. Panic surged through Qingzhou. "Fall back, now," he shouted, slapping the hilt of his sword. Reluctantly, his crew obeyed, cutting their anchors and firing their cannons skyward as a signal of retreat. Within moments, their ships were racing away, leaving the pirate alliance to claim the battlefield. None of Pepper's crew were fools. As soon as they saw the battle turn against them, many began brawling among themselves. Seizing control of the ship, they tried to break free and flee. "Interesting," came a calm, mocking voice from the deck of the Golden Lion fleet. "You actually intend to run?" Red Earl Patrick Redfield stepped forward, his eyes flashing crimson. He raised his hands and called, "Crimson Slash!" A brilliant blade of scarlet energy shot straight toward them. Pepper's face darkened. "You scoundrel! Bachong Fist! Iron Head!" He summoned every ounce of his flamboyant aura, bracing his skull like a battering ram. Boom! The two forces collided with a thunderous crack, rattling the very air. Stars danced before Pepper's eyes as the blow hammered his crown. "Ugh," he groaned. Gathering his strength, Pepper roared in defiance and thrust the Crimson Slash skyward. The scarlet blade streaked into the clouds and vanished. Pepper locked eyes with the lone figure on the Golden Lion fleet, his expression wary. "Who are you? Why attack me?" He tightened his fists, prepared for whatever came next. The Red Earl allowed a faint smile. From beneath his sea-soaked coat, he withdrew a dripping bounty order and held it before Pepper's eyes. "Patrick Redfield," he announced softly, "Red Earl of the Seven Seas." "An 8,000 and berry bounty," the Red Earl announced, each word deliberate and low. The moment the figure registered, Charles's jaw dropped. 8 billion berries? He'd always believed his own bounty hovered around 8 million. This young pirate's price was off the charts. Charles swallowed hard. "What do you want?" A tense grin flickered across Green Pepper's face. "Me? I plan to kill you, or die trying." A cold gleam ignited in the Red Earl's eyes. In a heartbeat, he tapped a toe, skated across the water's surface like a phantom, and dispatched Green Pepper with ruthless efficiency. The Red Earl's anger flared. He'd stumbled into a showdown of infamous pirates expecting fireworks. Instead, both Golden Lion and Roger had crushed him with sheer force. And then there was Vice Admiral Garp, this stupid-looking Marine Lieutenant General whose unassuming grin concealed terrifying strength. Reality, it seemed, delighted in humbling him at every turn. Garp's punch had rocked him like a cannon blast, yet even that blow hadn't managed to slow him due. 1N. The Red Earl was brimming with pent-up fury, but had nowhere to unleash it, until, as if on cue, a hefty punching bag materialized nearby. Seizing the chance, he sprang across the deck, sword chi crackling in his wake. With a sharp flourish of his umbrella, he carved a perfect crescent slash through the air, aiming straight for the bag. Chapter 272, Chasing Green Pepper. "Bastard! 8 punches!" Anger flared across Green Pepper's face. To have been humiliated like this, even by a level 8,000 pirate, was intolerable. In a blur of motion, he armored his fist and struck Slash with brutal force. The impact drove him back 3 or 4 steps before he finally steadied himself. "I'll make you pay for your arrogance." 8-punch boxing secret technique, conical dragon spike. Green Pepper's armored gauntlet morphed into a sharp cone as he gathered every ounce of strength and momentum into that single point. He charged like a living meteor, aiming the deadly spike straight at the Red Earl. "Heh heh! Check out this fancy move." The Red Earl merely sneered at the onrushing hurricane of steel. With a swift motion, he lifted his umbrella overhead. Clang! Bang! Green Pepper's fearsome strike shattered against the reinforced canopy in an instant. Before he could react, he found himself teetering upside down on the umbrella's tip, completely immobilized. Hateful! Charles's fist clenched as memories of that man from 5 years ago surged back. The same brutal style of attack, the same snapped-all head. Grief and indignation twisted in his chest. "Then come and get me yourself." Crimson shock! At the command, the Red Earl's umbrella spun on his wrist. Arcane sigils glowed along its ribs as a concentrated shockwave gathered at the tip. With a swift thrust, he sent the wave surging forward in a blade of scarlet energy. Sensing the deadly force, Charles's eyes went wide. His 5-meter-tall war construct lurched as if a kite cut loose from its string, then spun wildly. Crash! It slammed into the hull of a passing ship, shattering timber and steel in a single earth-shaking impact. Captain! Captain! Sailors of the Eight Treasures Navy swarmed the wreckage. Through the splintered planking of the cabin, they found Charles lying unconscious, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Medic! The Red Earl exhaled in relief. Still strong as ever, only tragedy follows every monster I face. He shifted his gaze to the three foes who, undeterred by the chaos, continued their fierce battle in the smoke and debris. Shiki, the Golden Lion, was carving out his legend in the New World. Even facing two opponents at once, he refused to yield an inch, though he couldn't hold out forever. Watching the fray, the Red Earl gripped the rail of his ship. Shiki, like a wounded lion, was lashing out at anyone who drew near. "He's gone berserk," the Earl muttered, shaking his head. Spotting his own boat moored nearby, he added, "We can't linger here. Sengoku's fleet will arrive any moment. It's too dangerous." With that, he leapt aboard and cast off, pulling away from the battle. "Boss Shiki, fall back! Admiral Sengoku is on his way!" shouted a scout from the flying pirates, his warning cutting through the clamor of clashing blades. At the scout's cry, Roger and Garp, who'd been exchanging blows with Shiki, paused. Vice Admiral Garp chuckled, turning to Roger. "No running now, eh? We're going to finish this today." Roger's grin faded instantly. He squared his shoulders, eyes narrowing. The balance of the fight had just shifted, and both sides knew it. Garp's words came like a thunderclap, enough to snap both Roger and Ski out of their daze, but it was Roger who stiffened most. Deep down he knew that if the Warring States period truly began, there was a very real chance they'd all be rounded up by the Marines. He turned on Charles and called out sharply, "Charles, enough. The Navy's here. You don't want to leave yourself exposed to them, do you?" Keeping his eyes locked on Charles's raised blade, Roger advanced, sliding his dagger against the flat of the pirate's sword to force it aside. Ski glowered at Roger, urgency written across his face. "Boss Charles, our men are falling fast. We can't hold them much longer." That was the last straw. Charles surveyed the grim faces of his officers and crew, men who'd nearly been cut down by both the Marines and the Roger Pirates, while the Red Earl had slipped away into the chaos, and he bellowed, "Fall back! Regroup!" He shoved Roger back with the edge of his blade, giving his men space to withdraw. Garp, poised to press the attack, was halted by Roger's sudden grasp on his arm. In the same instant, Roger and Charles each leveled their pistols at Garp's chest, their expressions hard as flint. Garp froze, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. For a fleeting moment, he'd almost forgotten that Roger was, in fact, a pirate captain too. Vice Admiral Garp stood rooted to the deck, utterly immobilized despite his fury. Targeted by two of the New World's fiercest pirates, he could only grit his teeth and roar, "Roger, Shiki, just you wait! I'll have the last laugh!" But neither Roger nor Shiki slowed. With a mocking laugh, Roger slipped his knife back into its sheath and made for his small boat, cradling the straw hat in one hand. "Sorry, Garp," he called over his shoulder. "I'm off first, but don't think you've seen the last of me." The boat pushed out from the warship and cut through the waves. Garp bellowed a single word to his men, "Retreat!" On a nearby deck, Shiki snarled in frustration as he activated his power and soared into the sky. "Damn it! They all got away! This whole operation's gone to hell!" Garp slammed a fist onto the deck. Before him, the sea spread out empty, and yet a new opportunity appeared. "Adjutant!" he barked. His aide saluted and pointed toward the horizon. "Sir, another pirate fleet is just up ahead. If we seize them, we'll still have something to report to Fleet Admiral Redfield." Garp shifted his gaze to where a cluster of ships lay waiting. Their sails bore a distinctive emblem, a dragon entwined with jewels. He narrowed his eyes. "The Eight Treasure Navy," he murmured. He remembered reading that they'd been prowling the New World for the last 5 or 6 years. A grudging smile curved on his lips. "Very well," he said. "Prepare to engage." Since his defeat at Charles's hands, Qingjiao had been darting through the New World, always just out of the Navy's reach. Now, Admiral Garp paced the deck, frustration coiling in his chest. He slammed a clenched fist against the rail. "Station that ship over there," he roared. "Aye, sir." The sailors called back, scrambling to obey. Below deck, Qingjiao's crew hauled their captain out of his cabin. His head spun, and for a moment he leaned against the bulkhead, trying to clear his vision. "Captain, sir," one sailor gasped, panic in his voice. "The Navy's on our tail." Qingjiao's eyes flicked to the horizon, where Garp's flagship cut through the waves, bearing down on them. He shook himself awake. "All hands, full sails," he barked. "Get us out of here, now!" Of the squadron's 8 ships, 1 had already been shattered. The other 7 piped up their sails and veered sharply, putting every knot they could between themselves and the pursuing warship. Garp tore off his shirt, revealing the corded muscles beneath. Behind him, Marines wheeled crates of cannonballs into place. With a guttural laugh, he scooped up a solid iron shot and hefted it in his massive palm. "Try running from this," he bellowed. He hurled the cannonball by hand with such force that it tore through the air like a volcanic projectile. Boom! The shot slammed into the lead vessel's hull, splintering wood and sending seawater roaring in. The stricken ship staggered, dead in the water. Bang, bang! Garp picked up another ball and threw it. Each impact rocked Qingjiao's fleet, ripping planks free and leaving helpless hulks drifting in his wake. "Damn it," Qingjiao swore, pounding the deck rail with the heel of his fist. The rest of his ships had no choice but to watch their sister vessels picked off one by one and hope they weren't next. Charles had nothing but bad luck. He'd stumbled into the heat of battle through no fault of his own, and wound up beaten bloody without even understanding why. No sooner had he pulled himself to his feet than he came face to face with Vice Admiral Garp, the Navy's infamous Mad Dog. Caught between his bruises and the Navy's fiercest enforcer, Charles realized all at once that his unlucky streak had just begun. Chapter 273, The Sad Green Pepper. "Captain, the sail's been shredded." A cannonball had ripped right through the center, leaving the once proud mainsail hanging in tatters. Charles stared at the ragged fabric, his heart sinking. They'd been on the run for 24 straight hours. Behind them, Vice Admiral Garp's flagship bore down like a ravenous hound, relentless in its pursuit. 3 of their 7 vessels were already lost, 5 years of effort squandered in a single day. From the deck of the pursuing ship came Garp's booming laughter. "Ha, Pepperhead, don't even think about escaping now. Come test old Garp's iron fist. I've heard your cone-shaped skull is tough. Let's see if it can take a hit from me. Beat me, and I might just let you live." Garp slammed another round into his cannon, though his ammo was running dangerously low after the ceaseless chase. "You worthless," he growled, but the words were swallowed by the sea wind. Charles gritted his teeth. Just then, he spotted a small island looming ahead. A fierce determination lit up his eyes. "Helmsman, make for that island. We'll anchor there. I'm going to face Garp myself. Let's see whose iron is strongest." "Aye, Captain," came the reply from every soul aboard the battered 8 Treasures flagship. The worn ship lurched toward the rocky shore. From his vantage point on the quarterdeck, Garp only laughed louder, eager to witness Charles's bold challenge. My bold tactic paid off. Or maybe I'm just clever. Next time in the Warring States period, if he dares call me brainless again, he'll get a taste of my iron fist. "Forward," Garp barked. The boats eased together, and the 2 fleets, ours and the Babo Navy, lined up on either side, weapons drawn and eyes locked. A fight could erupt at any moment. "Qingjiao!" Garp thundered, stepping forward with clenched fists and a wicked grin. "Today I'm going to smash your head to pieces." Qingjiao only laughed in scorn. "Ha! All your threats are empty. Nothing in this world is harder than my skull. Not even Charles could crack it." She tapped her temple, then tipped her head toward Charles, silently daring him. Charles remembered 5 years ago, when he was still honing his strength. He hadn't shattered her skull with that first strike, but he had scored a deep slash, the bone glinting beneath the wound. Garp caught sight of the faded scar and let a triumphant smirk spread across his face. "All right, let's see what you've got," Garp bellowed, infusing his right fist with armament Haki and charging at Qingjiao. "I'll crush your prideful punch, Garp," she shot back, covering her own arm in Haki as she met his attack head-on. The instant their ironclad blows collided, a crackle of lightning-like energy danced around Qingjiao's head. Sweat gleamed on both their brows as neither fighter gave an inch. The shockwave rippled through the harbor, forcing the surrounding 8 Treasures Navy and Marine crews to stumble backward, bracing themselves as ships groaned and swayed at their moorings. Teeth clenched, Qingjiao strained against the sheer power of Garp's fist, while he held firm against her relentless onslaught. Suspended in midair, their arms locked, each fought to overpower the other. For a long, breathless moment, neither yielded, until, finally, fatigue began to show. Captain Garp slammed Charles's head against the deck, as if it were cushioned by air. The boy crumpled to his knees, his neck bowed, eyes wide with shock. Then he went limp under Garp's iron grip. "Captain!" Charles's crewmates yelled, racing forward. Garp's Marines roared their approval. Garp looked down at the fallen pirate, his brow iron flat, corners of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "Secure the prisoners," he ordered. In an instant, the Marines sprang into action. Charles lay motionless as Garp strode across the deck, hoisted him by the collar, and carried him aboard the flagship. "No resistance, or else," Garp warned the scattered pirates, who turned and fled in panic. The clash was over, almost before it began. With Charles unconscious and his crew subdued, Garp ordered full sail for Marineford. Word of the capture spread like wildfire. Captain Garp's victory over the Bell Pepper pirates became the talk of every port, every ship, every tavern. Before long, the news reached naval headquarters. In the admiral's office, Vice Admiral Sora leaned over a holopad, scanning the latest dispatch. "What do you make of this?" she asked. The screen displayed a single headline: "Marine hero Garp apprehends green pepper cone. Young pirate Charles in custody." Every officer in the room turned to face the image of the boy pirate, the one whose defeat by Garp would be remembered for years to come. Charles had always been feared for his perfect captures, and no one had ever slipped through his fingers. Until now. Green Pepper was the first. What the Navy didn't know was that Charles had deliberately let Green Pepper escape. They all simply assumed he'd been defeated. Yet today, in the New World, Admiral Garp managed to seize Green Pepper at last. A small but welcome victory for the Marines. In recent years, the Navy's reputation had taken one blow after another. Beyond the death of Locke, they'd been humiliated by Whitebeard, the Golden Lion, and Charles himself, and even the Roger pirates had slapped them around during Operation Four Seas. Their honor lay in tatters, so this capture, though the pirate in question wasn't the strongest, was a rare moment of triumph. After all, in the New World, Green Pepper still commanded thousands of men. "Fleet Admiral, I move that we stage a public execution." A Vice Admiral's voice rang through the conference room. Tsuru, Vice Admiral, Tsuru, lifted her fan and tapped it sharply on the table. Every officer fell silent and turned their attention toward her, waiting. After Green Pepper's defeat, a transmission arrived from the world government. "Return the Green Pepper to the Kingdom of Flowers." Vice Admiral Crane looked to Sora and issued the order in a steady voice. The Marines around them bristled instantly. "Vice Admiral Crane, this is impossible," one officer shouted. "We sacrificed too many lives to capture Qingjiao. Lieutenant General Garp himself led the operation. How can we just hand him over to the Kingdom of Flowers? Even if we spare his life, we should lock him away in Advancement City for the rest of his days." "That's right, we can't let him go free." Another senior officer chimed in, and soon the entire group was shouting in agreement. Crane raised a hand to restore order, then sighed. "You're all missing the point. Qingjiao's not an ordinary pirate. Behind him stands a sovereign nation, a member of the world government that governs the Kingdom of Flowers. They've officially demanded his release. But don't mistake this for leniency. If he returns to piracy once he's home, we'll arrest him again, and this time, we won't let him out." Marshal Kong slammed his fist on the table. "If he returns, if he even dares to sail these waters again, he's as good as dead." The gathered Marines exchanged glances. When Kong spoke, his word was law. Lieutenant Kuro stepped forward and quietly tore down the wanted poster pinned to the wall. "Sir, the bounty on the Green Pepper is withdrawn." Kong nodded, then lifted a second poster from the table. "With the Red Earl's reappearance, these seas won't know peace for a long time." According to Admiral Garp's latest reports, the Red Earl's strength now rivals Garp himself. It's high time we revisited his bounty. He spread the weathered poster before them. "This has been 6 years old, but the threat has only grown. I expect your recommendations on a revised reward by dawn." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room as the Marines sprang into action, fully aware that the tides of power at sea were shifting once more. Chapter 274. Everyone stared in stunned silence at the old bounty poster, the one the Red Earl had issued 6 years ago. In the world of piracy, a new generation of titans was rising, and navies everywhere were on edge. First came Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, then the Golden Lion, Shiki. Next, the world's greatest swordsman, Rockefeller Charles. Following him was the captain of the Roger pirates, Brother D. Roger. And now there was another fearsome figure, the Red Earl himself, Patrick Ryder Field. Against these 5 great pirate lords, the Navy's top officers felt their strength slipping away. Fleet Admiral Steelbone Kong, Admiral Sengoku, known as the Buddha, Admiral Zephyr, nicknamed Black Wrist, and the Navy hero Monkey D. Carp, the Iron Fist. Although each of them was a legend, even together they trailed behind the sheer combat power of the new pirate captains. It was arguably the most perilous moment in Navy history. If those 5 great pirates ever joined forces, the Navy could very well collapse. Recognizing the threat, the world government had finally lifted its strictures on naval deployment. Squadrons were being freed from garrison duty, and reinforcements were being sent to the Grand Line. Still, everyone knew one thing remained unclear. What was the Red Earl's true objective this time? Whether by accident or by design, Charles has seized the world's attention. Rumor now holds that he ranks as one of the 5 elders of the pirate age, standing shoulder to shoulder with Gol D Roger, the Golden Lion Shiki, Whitebeard, and the mysterious Green Peppercone. Such a bold claim is everywhere in print. Crane spread out the freshly delivered Morgan's Gazette on the table. Its headlines blazed with unprecedented detail. A titanic clash involving Roger's crew, Shiki's flying pirates, Admiral Garp's naval forces, the Red Earl Patrick Redfield, and finally, Charles himself, known as the Green Peppercone, whose entire armada was captured in the aftermath. According to the Gazette, this 5-way confrontation rivaled even the legendary Whitebeard Golden Lion War of 3 years ago. Sora slammed his fist on the table. Damn Morgans, they're absolutely everywhere. He flipped through the pages and scoffed at the reporter's bold proclamations. They've trampled the Navy's dispatches like yesterday's ash. Around them, the other officers fell silent, scowling over the Gazette's every line. The Morgan's reporters spared no detail or flair, and the Navy's own account now seemed threadbare by comparison. Crane tapped a particular paragraph with his pen. And mark my words, the Red Earl's bounty is about to surge. They've undervalued him badly. His reputation just shot through the roof. He folded the paper, eyes glinting. Prepare for new orders, gentlemen. The tides of power are shifting once more. Sora inclined his head. All right, Crane. How high should the bounty go? Crane, who sat to Sora's left, squared his shoulders and spoke without hesitation. 25 billion. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Only minutes earlier, the reward had been set at 15 billion, and now Crane wanted to raise it by 10 more. The assembled officers exchanged uneasy glances. An older sailor cleared his throat. 25 billion is excessive. Such a sudden jump will draw more attention to us. Let's cap it at 20 billion. Even then, he'll rank just below Whitebeard, Golden Lion, Charles, Roger, and Lingling. Vice Admiral Kong's jaw tightened. 25 billion would almost equal Lingling's bounty, and that was enough to unsettle the entire fleet. A bounty that size would guarantee headlines, and inevitably the Navy would be blamed for overreacting. Better to err on the side of caution. Crane nodded in agreement. He'd proposed 25 billion, based purely on Red Earl Patrick Redfield's reputation and raw strength. Politically, he understood Kong's concern. Very well, release the announcement. Red Earl Patrick Redfield, bounty set at 20 billion for his heinous crimes. Let the provincial authorities accuse us of alarmism. Too bad, so sad. Sora studied Crane for a moment, then allowed himself a small smile. Make it so, and prepare our next move. Once the world reacts to this, we'll be ready. With that, the chamber fell silent, each man already calculating the storm they'd just unleashed. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap this up. Staff Officer Crane gave a crisp nod. I'll see to the arrangements immediately. With that, the meeting was adjourned. There was far too much on the Navy's plate to linger over formalities. After all, their jurisdiction extended not only across the 4 seas, but also through the first half of the Grand Line, and now into the perilous New World. Further ahead, the ship drifted into the calm belt. On deck, Charles lay sprawled in the sunshine, squinting against the glare as he sipped coconut milk and savored this rare moment of peace. Unaware that no new reports from the New World had yet reached Wufeng, he hadn't the faintest notion that the man he longed to see, Patrick Redfield, had resurfaced, nor that the formidable Red Earl was hunting him down. Meanwhile, somewhere in the heart of the New World, the Red Earl studied the horizon through narrowed eyes. "Charles should be holed up on Kame Island," he muttered, recalling the promise he'd made 6 years before. With no direct line to Charles, and ignorant of his recent departure, the Earl set sail for Turtle Island at once. When his flagship finally dropped anchor off Kame's rocky shore, he stormed ashore only to discover his quarry was gone. "What? Charles isn't here!" he roared, grabbing his aide Carter by the collar. Carter's eyes darted nervously. "My lord, this was the last known location in our logs." "Then find him," the Red Earl snapped. "I want every clue, every whisper. I will not be denied." A clamorous uproar filled the docks as the Red Earl forced his way aboard the Rockefeller pirate's vessel. Furious shouts and the clash of steel greeted him, but the instant the pirates realized these were Charles's men, the Red Earl held back. No lives would be lost today. One of the stunned pirates hurried forward. "Charles isn't here, my lord." The Red Earl's dark eyes snapped up, towering over the man. With a single swift motion, he pressed his massive hand against Carter's head. 3 months gone without a word," he rumbled, voice low and dangerous. Suppressing a sigh, the Red Earl released Carter and strode off the deck toward the pier. "Fine," he muttered over his shoulder. "If Charles isn't here, I'll find someone else to challenge, and I'll be back for him." Climbing aboard his ship, he pulled a tattered wanted poster from his coat, its bounty marked in the endless zeros of legend. He traced the name with a gloved finger. Edward Newgate, Whitebeard. At his signal, the ship's bell tolled, and the vessel slowly creaked free from the dock, cutting across the horizon toward the treacherous waters of the New World. Back on the pier, Carter staggered to his feet, hand pressed against the jagged scar on his chest. Gasping for breath, he shouted after the departing ship, "No, you must inform Captain Charles at once." He had no idea of the deep bond between the Red Earl and Charles, only that trouble had just sailed away and would certainly return. It was, in fact, the Red Earl's umbrella that had caused the wound. Fortunately, it wasn't deep, and he'd suffer no lasting harm. All around them, the Rockefeller pirate officers leaned on one another as they recovered. "Is that really the Red Earl who fought the Golden Lion Shiki and naval hero Garp?" someone whispered. "He's every bit as powerful as they say." Paul and Isaac hauled each other to their feet and watched Captain Charles stride off. "Captain, when will you return?" they shouted. Charles offered them a wry smile. It had been 3 months since he'd taken up residence on this isolated island. During the first month, activity had been minimal, but by the second month, word leaked out that he was away, and before long, every pirate hungry for Charles's scalp poured onto the island. Had our own strength been any less formidable, they might have been overwhelmed. Through the pressure of those attacks, everyone came to appreciate the simple truth. Their freedom to roam the New World depended entirely on Charles's fearsome reputation and on the respect commanded by the Rockefeller pirate flag. If they hoped to survive, or more ambitiously, to claim an island in the New World, they needed to take action now. The great pirate lords had, for the moment, held back, leaving only a handful of small-time crews stirring trouble. Most of these cutthroats had fled the Golden Lion's pursuit in the 4 seas and drifted into Charles's waters, their eyes set on encroaching upon Xiao Luo's territory. But they were nothing more than rookie pirates, barely ranked in the low Luo class, a manageable threat that Carter and the others could dispatch without breaking a sweat. Chapter 275, Kleinslood. Charles sat on the bow, staring out at the glassy expanse of ocean. He hadn't seen the sea this calm in ages. Since entering the New World, the weather had been merciless, towering waves, sudden squalls, and near-constant storms. He'd grown used to rocking on the deck, bracing himself for the next disaster. Now the water lay still as a mirror, and the eerie tranquility made Charles feel oddly uneasy. The engines rumbled beneath him, a steadier reassurance than the restless sea. They just crossed into the infamous windless belt. No wind, no sails, just an unbroken calm that was said to attract sea kings. Charles had taken precautions. He'd installed Hylushi's stealth plating on the hull to mask their presence from Neptune's perception abilities. But even so, rumors of these waters' dangers ran deep, and he couldn't shake his nerves. For 2 days now, he'd perched here at dawn and dusk, peering into the haze, expecting a sudden Sea King assault. He drilled the crew repeatedly on battle stations, cross-checked precautions, and steeled himself for the worst. Yet nothing appeared, just this unsettling stillness. Still, he'd witnessed enough of these leviathans to know how prolific they could be. In a true Sea King nest, creatures larger than ships swarmed like schools of fish. Memories of titanic, writhing bodies slipping beneath the hull kept Charles alert. Any moment, he thought, the water could erupt. He took a slow breath. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, not from heat but from anticipation. Whatever lay ahead in this windless stretch, Charles vowed to meet it head-on. The calm might last, but he wouldn't let his guard down until they'd safely passed Slood Point. Then, and only then, could he call himself truly at ease. Charles lifted his gaze and saw it at once. A colossal Sea King, its serpentine form motionless on the glassy water, lying not far from the ship's prow. At first the presence of these legendary beasts had set his nerves on edge, but after 2 full days in the windless belt, he'd grown strangely accustomed to their silent patrol. The great creatures barely acknowledged the vessel's passage now, and the crew, and Charles himself, could hardly contain their collective relief. Gone was the tension that had gripped everyone when he first announced his plan to cross into these dreaded waters. Tales of the windless belt's perils were etched into every sailor's memory. No one dared venture there for sport. Even the infamous Roger pirates skirted only the fringes of the calm zone to evade the Navy, never plunging deeper. Yet Charles had steered straight through the heart of it all, quelling every objection with the force of his reputation. As each uneventful hour passed, the crew's fear dissolved, until Charles's attention snapped back to the horizon. There, carved into a jagged cliff face and half-shrouded in mist, yawned the hidden lair of the Sea King, a cavernous maw that seemed to swallow what little light the setting sun could spare. A hush fell across the deck. In that sudden stillness, Alina burst from below decks, her eyes wide with urgency. "Charles! Charles!" she called, her voice trembling with both awe and alarm. Charles was dozing on the bow when a sudden cry rang out. "Martha's in labor!" He sprang to his feet, heart pounding. "Martha's going into labor?" he called, racing toward the main cabin. Elena met him in the corridor, her face creased with concern. "Yes, her water just broke. The doctor's already preparing the delivery room." She took his arm and hurried him onward. They reached the little anteroom outside the birthing chamber. Within, muffled but agonized cries echoed down the hall, Martha in the throes of childbirth once again. Through the open door, Alina's newborn son lay bundled in the arms of her sister, Paris. Charles paused, and a smile flickered across his face. Rockefeller Crane. That would be the perfect name for this 10th son of the Rockefeller line. But as another sharp wail drifted out, Charles felt a stab of guilt tighten his chest. Ix young women had borne his children in as many months, each labor more harrowing than the last. Every delivery was a day of suffering he'd asked them to endure. Was it right to keep pressing on, or should he rest these mothers and look elsewhere? He glanced over his shoulder at Tianue, who'd slipped in just behind them. Even now, the man was poring over documents as if assessing investments, unconcerned that his own wife lay in the next room, struggling to bring new life into the world. Charles frowned. Power and ambition had long since hardened Tianue's heart, but watching Martha's pain today, Charles realized how easily he too could lose his humanity if he stayed on this path. He straightened his shoulders and tapped lightly on the delivery room door. "Martha," he called, voice firm but gentle. "I'm here." Inside, the cry was instantly answered, less desperate now, more like a rallying shout. And as Charles stepped across the threshold, he resolved that no matter how many heirs the Rockefellers claimed, he would never forget the price each one paid. Charles shook his head, trying to banish the whirlwind of nerves, and waited just outside the delivery room door. Then came a single, piercing wail. His heart leapt. The maid appeared moments later, carefully cradling a tiny, wrinkled infant. "Sir, both Lady Martha and the baby are safe," she announced, relief in her voice. Charles hurried over. "Is it a daughter?" The maid's smile widened. "Yes, master. She's a healthy baby girl." Pure joy flooded him. He closed his eyes for an instant, savoring the news. "At last I have a little sister!" Behind him, Caesar and Robert erupted in triumphant shouts. Their exuberance startled the newborn, and she began to cry afresh in Charles's arms. He rocked her gently, cooing soothingly until her cries softened. With a playful glare, he turned on the two boys. "Not so loud. You'll wake the entire wing." Embarrassed, they snapped to attention. Charles surveyed the fragile bundle in his arms. "She needs a fitting name," he mused. "If she's a girl, then she shall be Rockefeller Sluder." Name decided, he stepped into the chamber. Lady Martha lay pale but peaceful on the bed, exhaustion and joy mingled on her face. With the utmost care, Charles laid the sleeping infant beside her. He looked down at his mother and sister, pride shining in his eyes. "Here, mother. Our daughter." Charles stepped into the chamber, gently cradling the newborn in his arms. "Rockefeller Sluder, what a beautiful name," he exclaimed, beaming down at the tiny face. Turning to Martha, he offered a warm smile. "You should rest now. Once you're feeling stronger, you can sit up again." Martha reached out as if to hold her daughter, but Charles softly guided her hand back onto the pillows. "Really, just lie back and recover," he urged, and she obediently settled in. Outside the door, excited chatter erupted. Nearly all of Charles's older children had sprinted in upon hearing there was a new sibling. They jostled one another, convinced this was their baby sister. Charles frowned and called, "All right, that's enough. Everyone, back out." At his firm tone, they skidded away, instantly clearing the room. He turned once more to Martha. "Don't worry, I won't keep you. The nurses will take good care of her." With a gentle pat to Martha's hand, he rose, stepped into the corridor, and handed the infant to the waiting nurse. A brief nod to the maids remaining behind, and Charles quietly left the cabin. Charles stood at the head of the deck, his voice booming across the assembled crew. "Congratulations to the captain, and another daughter." A roar of cheers answered him. "Tonight we feast to welcome my daughter," Charles announced, smiling broadly. This was an old tradition. Whenever his wife bore a child, he held a banquet for everyone aboard. The deckhands and officers alike looked forward to it, though the cooks were already griping about the extra work. As twilight deepened, torches and lanterns were lit, setting the deck aglow. Long tables were laid out under mess, strings of lanterns, and a line of maids began carrying steaming platters of food. There were spiced game stews, golden roasted fowl, platters of river fish in tangy sauces, and bowls piled high with exotic fruits that the crew hadn't tasted in months. At the sight, hungry sailors' eyes brightened, and they fell upon the dishes like wolves. Charles took his place at the captain's table, a goblet of wine in hand. Around him sat his senior officers, voices raised in laughter and toasts. Beside him, 14-year-old Barrett watched the revelry with wide eyes. This was the first time Barrett had joined such a celebration, and when Charles offered him a cup of wine, the boy grinned and took a cautious sip. All night long, the deck echoed with music, laughter, and the clang of mugs as the crew toasted the newborn daughter of their captain, and the promise of good fortune she would bring them all. The crooked officials pressed cup after cup into his hand, never letting him set it down. Barrett's head swam as confusion overtook him. Off to the side, Charles leaned back and watched in silence, a small smile playing on his lips. He was thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. Chapter 276, Lanternfish. A steel battleship drifted through the glassy expanse of the windless belt. The crew had grown so accustomed to its eerie stillness that the sudden alarm cut through the silence like a blade. "Captain, report," the watchman shouted from the foredeck. "A lanternfish is bearing down on us, full speed." Charles, who'd been lounging in a deck chair with a blindfold over his eyes, sprang to his feet and whipped it aside. Far off, the sea's surface heaved in thunderous waves. "It's enormous," he muttered, leaning forward. Crewmen rushed to the railings. Robert, Sif, and their siblings clambered up to the sixth deck to get a better view. Not far away, a colossal lanternfish burst from the depths, a leviathan at least 1,000 meters from snout to tail fin. "A kilometer long at the very least," Sif breathed. Shock rippled through the onlookers, but none of them wavered. Their father stood behind them, an cloak billowing, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. For more than a week, they'd navigated this treacherous belt, and each time a sea king had charged, their father had cut it down with a single, masterful stroke. Now, as the lanternfish reared up before them, every eye was fixed on him, waiting for that familiar flash of steel. The sea kings that charged in this time were enormous. As Charles stared at the glowing lantern before him, his mind drifted to the few treasures in the One Piece world that had always captivated him. Pure gold, a legendary metal whose forging secrets have been lost, rumored to grant longevity, and the fabled elixir baby said to prolong life. Both were priceless. Ever since he'd slipped through time, Charles had worried about growing old. He'd arrived decades too soon. By the time Luffy finally set sail, he'd be closing in on 60. Without some extraordinary life extension, he'd inevitably feel the toll of every passing year. Of course, he hadn't overlooked the other godlike relics scattered across the Grand Line. The Op Op no Mi, whose operation technique could grant eternal youth. The Millennium Dragon Fruit of the mythical Zoan class. The various animal system and phantom beast devil fruits, and the Bat Bat no Mi, model vampire, with its vampire form capable of restoring one's youth. Fortunately, Charles had already consumed the vampire fruit, so at least for now, the ravages of time were something he could ignore. Charles's heart pounded. Pure gold was said to grant its wearer a longer life, and when untouched by celestial dragons, it was the rarest treasure of all. If this giant lanternfish really had swallowed an island of pure gold, no one at sea could rival its wealth. Still, Charles wasn't certain the fish carried a hidden hoard, yet the chance was too great to pass up. The creature before him was colossal, as large as a small island, its bioluminescent lantern glowing a rich, molten gold unlike any Charles had ever seen on a lanternfish. He drew his 7-star sword, its blade wreathed in the dark purple aura known as Overlord's color, and strode to the ship's prow. His crewmates fell silent, gathering behind him to watch. Unaware of the steel warship drifting alongside it, the lanternfish drifted lazily through the waves, its eyes closed in peaceful oblivion. As the massive beast glided ever nearer, Charles steadied his grip on the sword's hilt. This was his chance. If even a sliver of that golden light hinted at true gold deep within its belly, the reward would be worth the risk. He raised his sword, preparing to strike, and with the hush of the crew heavy on his back, Charles silently vowed he would seize this treasure no matter the danger. Charles's eyes narrowed as he watched the glow atop his opponent's head. He flexed his toes, then vanished in an instant. A heartbeat later, he reappeared above the great lanternfish, sword raised high. Sensing the danger, the creature's huge eyelids flicked open. It stared up at him, startled. "Demon slash!" Charles roared. Steel met light in a blinding arc as the 7-star sword came down in a 100-meter-long sweep. With a thunderous crack, Charles cleaved the massive lantern balanced on the fish's head. The lantern toppled free, clattering to the deck below. For a stunned moment, the lanternfish froze, gazing helplessly at its fallen prize. Then a fountain of blood erupted from the gaping wound, spraying upward in a crimson plume. The creature let out a gut-wrenching roar so fierce that some of the weaker crew members on deck covered their ears against the sound. Charles dropped nimbly to the planks and strode over to examine the shattered lantern, his sword still humming with power. Around him, the ship's crew scrambled to tend to the wounded beast, or to mount a fresh defense against its next move. But for now, Charles stood ready, every muscle coiled for what came next. Charles raised a single hand, and in an instant, the colossal lanternfish, nearly 10 meters long, lifted effortlessly from the waves. He'd expected the creature to be unbearably heavy, yet somehow he'd hurled it skyward with far more force than he'd intended. On deck, Shay reacted without hesitation. In one swift dash, he caught the airborne fish and flung it toward the ship's bow. Barrett, anticipating the throw, dove clear of its descent, then sprawled out and seized the writhing beast just before it struck. The deck held firm, unscarred by the impact, and a ripple of relieved cheers spread among the crew. Charles allowed himself the faintest of smiles, until a vast shadow blotted out the sky overhead. "Captain, watch out!" someone shouted from below. Charles's smile froze, and then he vanished. The lanternfish snapped its jaws where he'd stood, only to chomp down on empty air and swallow a mouthful of salty seawater in its fury. Charles reappeared on the creature's scaly back with a single silent leap, his trademark moonstep. Sword in hand, he called out, "Demon Sword Overlord!" A menacing aura flared around the seven-star sword as he hoisted it high. Then, with a roar of power, he brought it down in a 1,000-meter arc aimed straight at the enraged fish beneath him. Whoosh! Charles woke with a jolt. The world around him shuddered as if under assault. The sea churned wildly, clouds roiled overhead, and jagged flashes of thunder lit the sky. Then came a deafening boom, and something massive ripped through the water. Blood surged in crimson waves, staining the sea's surface as if someone had cleaved straight into the lanternfish itself. Inside that vast, living vessel, Charles was hurled upright. "What's happening?" he muttered, blinking in confusion. He'd been asleep just moments ago. He staggered from the small chamber where he'd lain and, splat, a glistening piece of flesh and blood slapped his cheek. Charles yelped, rubbing his face furiously. No, that can't be right. Across the cavity of the lanternfish, a gash gaped in its side, revealing the sky beyond. Where the heavens should have been deep red by now, there was a hint of pale blue. Charles's heart hammered. Is the lanternfish splitting open? He pushed himself to his feet and peered through the opening. A single figure hovered amid the fissure, motionless against the faint daylight. Charles squinted, trying to make sense of the impossible sight. Farther off, a middle-aged man, one of the lanternfish's crew, stood rooted in place, eyes wide. "The lanternfish, cracked?" he whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to that sliver of blue sky. It had been years since he'd seen daylight. Inside the bleeding mammoth they called home, both boy and man realized the same impossible truth. The lanternfish was dying, and with it, the world they knew might be shattered forever. A century, maybe two, had passed, and I never thought I would live to see the sun again. Yet here I stood, sword in hand, bathed in daylight at last. The outside world. With a single sweeping stroke, I cut the lanternfish from head to tail. My blade, a strike befitting a lord, sliced clean through its armored back. 3 small islands bobbed within the creature's cavernous stomach, as nine, if carried across some threefold archipelago. Below me, the lanternfish drifted motionless on the waves, its life extinguished by my hand. Chapter 277, Pure Gold Maker. The massive lanternfish carcass drifted like a broken raft across the inky sea. Charles stood on its slick, bloated flank, the coppery tang of blood stinging his nostrils. He fought down the rising nausea. More than the gruesome sight, the smell warned him of true danger. This was the Sea King's lair, and any moment, titanic Neptunes could swarm them. He scanned the horizon. Already, vast shapes rippled through the waves, converging with alarming speed. Sailors on deck froze, eyes wide with unease. "Barrett!" Charles shouted. His first mate snapped to attention. "Sir, bring the electromagnetic batteries online. Prepare to engage every Neptune that closes in." Barrett snatched the comm unit. "All stations, weapons ready, awaiting my mark to fire on incoming Neptunes." Below decks in the captain's cabin, operators sprang into action, rerouting power to the ship's arsenal. A low hum spread across the deck as the coils of 120 electromagnetic cannons glowed with energy. Charles's gaze never wavered from the dark silhouettes racing toward them. When the nearest of the Sea Kings breached the waterline, Barrett's voice cut through the hum. "Fire!" A deafening roar erupted as blue-white arcs of energy leapt from every barrel. The beams streaked across the waves, slamming into the oncoming Neptunes with a cascade of explosive force. Water and light danced in a deadly ballet, the first volley driving back the horde and marking the opening gambit in a battle for survival among the giants of the deep. All the electromagnetic guns barked in unison, their muzzles swiveling to track the Neptunes hurtling toward them at breakneck speed. The instant Charles gave the order, he ducked his head, rammed his pike into the lanternfish's side, and sprinted inside. From the outside, the creature looked enormous, but its inner cavity was surprisingly tight, and seawater was already gushing through every seam. At this rate, Charles calculated they'd be flooded out in under an hour, and the whole vessel would sink. "What's happening? Why is the water pouring in like this?" cried little Machina Olga, her voice trembling. Though she looked no older than a 7-year-old, Olga had lived nearly 2 centuries, and she'd never seen anything go so catastrophically wrong. Beside her, Elizabeth the great lizard thrashed in panic, her scaly tail knocking over crates. Not far away, a portly, middle-aged man fought with a stuck valve, trying to inflate an emergency buoyancy bag. This decrepit, 200-year-old hull was all that kept him alive, and it was failing fast. He panted heavily, sweat beading on his brow. They were oblivious to one more twist of fate, a lone figure plummeting from the heights above. Then, bump, Charles hit the floor with a bone-jarring crash. Miskina Ahi, standing just a few feet away, let out a startled cry as Charles's arrival sent her sprawling across the wet deck. What? The gas-filling arm froze mid-cycle, the supply valve sputtering toxic mist across the cabin. Ahie yelped, slamming his hand over his diver's intake. When the fog finally cleared, Charles stepped forward, his trench coat plastered to his lean frame, eyes cold on the rotund man kneeling at the console. Ahie's heart stopped. Charles, the maker of pure gold, stood before him. "I'm here for pure gold," Charles said quietly. "Tell me where to find it, and you walk away." He took a deliberate step closer. Ahie scrambled backward, panic widening his eyes. "No, you don't understand," Ahie stammered, hand trembling as he gripped the metal deck. "I've never seen pure gold." At the mere mention of that name, Ahie flinched. He'd lost his wife and daughter chasing the fabled metal once before. Charles's jaw tightened. "I won't ask again. I've disabled this lanternfish sub. Seawater will breach its hull in under an hour. Your motorboat won't save you." He tapped the sealed viewport. "And we're in a windless belt out there. No currents to help you. You're trapped." Ahie's body shook so violently the planks groaned beneath him. Sweat rolled down his cheeks as he struggled for breath. Charles folded his arms, waiting. The only sound was Ahie's ragged breathing. "Now," Charles said, voice low and unyielding, "tell me where pure gold is." Chapter X, Inside the Lanternfish. "Tell me where the pure gold is, or forget ever seeing your daughter again." Charles's voice reverberated through the giant lanternfish's cavernous stomach. "She's trapped in here too, and if you delay any longer, the sea will claim her." At his command, Charles's extraordinary spatial awareness flared to life. A three-dimensional map of the fish's innards unfurled in his mind, every organ, every drop of brine laid bare. Nothing within those walls could escape his all-seeing gaze. Ahead of them, the little girl and her upright lizard companion lunged toward a jagged tear in the flesh of the fish, pale bioluminescence dancing across their terrified faces. Their frantic scrambling carried Charles's ultimatum straight to Ahie's ears. "My daughter?" The stout man's voice cracked as he stared at Charles in disbelief. "She's still inside?" Charles didn't answer. He simply seized Ahie's bulky arm and pulled him down the slick corridor toward another chamber deeper in the fish's belly. Cold seawater was already seeping in from below, creeping along the walls in glowing turquoise rivulets. In his panic, Ahie clung to Charles's arm, pressing his body uncomfortably close. Charles felt a surprising warmth at the contact. No one had ever held him that tightly before. But there was no time to dwell on it. With a curt nod, Charles led the way onward, determined to uncover the hidden cache of pure gold and to rescue the terrified little girl before it was too late. Charles already knew where the pure gold lay, buried within the bioluminescent lantern of the great lanternfish. At dawn, he'd torn that glowing organ free and hauled it aboard. Now he ventured into the beast's cavernous innards, determined not only to harvest every last speck of precious metal, but also to find its unwitting creator, the eccentric inventor Ahie. Though Ahie's discovery of pure gold had been a lucky accident, Charles hoped he could somehow persuade him to replicate the miracle. Against all odds, he was willing to try. Slipping past slimy folds and through winding passages of muscle and membrane, Charles finally emerged in a vast chamber, a secondary stomach that pulsed with faint, otherworldly light. There, perched upon the armored ridge of a small, upward-crawling lizard, lay a motionless child. The lizard inched steadily toward an opening high above, carrying its passenger like a living elevator. "Olga!" Charles exclaimed, stepping forward. At the sound of her name, the girl stirred. She turned her pale, wide-eyed face and whispered, "Dad?" Charles froze. Suspended nearby by a loop of glistening sinew was a man whose body had swollen grotesquely over years inside the fish. His cheeks and nose were streaked with tears and mucus. Charles realized at once, this was Ahie, Nearly 2 centuries had passed since Ahi, and his little daughter had been swallowed whole by this leviathan. Yet here she was, unchanged by time. The faint echo of her one word broke something in him. Overcome with relief and disbelief, Ahi's legs gave way, and he collapsed into the soft, living walls of the chamber. Charles's heart tightened at the sound of their cries, father and daughter calling out to one another in despair. He took a steadying breath and spoke out, forcing his voice to remain calm. "She's your daughter," he said firmly, putting distance between himself and the two of them. "If you tell me where the pure gold is hidden, I'll save you both, and I'll cure her non-high fever." He stepped back, giving himself room to maneuver. Olga stood about 10 meters away, her eyes flicking between her ailing father and the water that was already lapping at their ankles. Ahi's face drained of color as he weighed Charles's words against his daughter's desperate condition. "It's in the lanterns of the anglerfish." Ahi Lai choked out. "Every last piece of pure gold is inside those lanterns. None is scattered elsewhere." Without another word, the old man dropped to his knees at Charles's feet and gripped the young rescuer's leg. "Is it really all there?" he pleaded. "Not a single fragment missing?" Charles knelt, looking straight into Ahi's haunted eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "every bit of it." Relief washed across Ahi's features, but nearby, Olga's fury burned brighter than ever. She rushed forward, her voice cracking with righteous anger. "You bastard!" she screamed. "Who are you to treat my father like this?" Yet even as she unleashed her rage, Olga's gaze wavered with concern at the sight of her father humbling himself before a stranger. Charles caught her eye for a moment, and in that instant he reached down, took Ahi gently by the arm, and lifted him to his feet. Spreading his arms as if to embrace them both, he prepared to glide forward, determined to shield father and daughter from the rising waters, and to claim the lanterns that held the cure they so desperately needed. Chapter 278, Pure Gold. Charles shot forward like a missile, closing the distance to Olga in an instant. Shock and fear replaced her earlier fury, and even the giant lizard beneath them froze, its reptilian eyes wide with panic. With one arm, Charles cradled Ahi to his chest. With the other, he grabbed Olga's wrist and yanked her clear of the beast's snapping jaws. He spared a glance for the lizard, swung his right leg up, and delivered a powerful kick to its tail. The creature let out a terrified screech, squeezed its eyes shut, and felt a sharp pain jab through its hindquarters. Then it was launched skyward, flying out of the crumbling ruins below. Charles sprang off his tippy toes, vaulted into the air, and carried Olga and Ahi toward freedom. They burst out of the wreckage and into the open sky. Behind them, the thunder of defense cannons rattled the air. Electromagnetic pulse guns along the deck barked out electric currents that arced through the water toward the oncoming sea kings. Any creature swimming within 50 meters was vaporized by just 2 direct hits. Those lurking beyond 100 meters required more than 10 pulses to bring down. So far, the truly massive, kilometer-long sea kings hadn't shown up, but even the smaller ones, only a few dozen meters in length, had every sailor scrambling. Charles banked in midair, clutching Olga and Ahi close. Below, the ship's crew fought desperately against the rising tide of monsters. But for now, Charles had what mattered most, the 2 lives he'd risked everything to save. Charles peered anxiously over the ship's gunwale as the bodies of fallen sea kings drifted in the water. Each corpse released a cloud of blood that only drew more monsters from the depths. It was a vicious cycle. Kill one, and a dozen more would come answering the scent. "Where is Dad?" Ace murmured from the masthead, voice tight with tension. He swept the horizon with his spyglass and spied another pod of sea kings plowing through the swell. "If he doesn't show up soon, we'll be overrun." "Don't lose hope," Caesar said quietly beside him. He rested a hand on Ace's shoulder. "Trust Dad. He's just been held up by something. He'll make it back." Below, the deck rattled under the staccato fire of the ship's electromagnetic cannons. Each blast pushed the brutes back, keeping them at least 1,000 meters away. Still, the blood in the water was a beacon that refused to be snuffed. Charles sprinted across the planking, activating the high-speed moonwalkers strapped to his boots. He launched himself skyward, landing nimbly on the back of a massive, wounded sea king that thrashed at the surface. Steam hissed from its torn flesh. Even so, the creature tried to fling Charles into the sea. Leaning low to maintain his balance, Charles reached into the monster's gaping maw and yanked out the last struggling lizard it held in its jaws. With a final, defiant snarl, the Sea King collapsed beneath him. Charles dropped lightly onto the deck, the lizard wriggling in his arms. Around him, the crew reloaded cannons and prepared to fire again the moment the next wave of beasts broke the horizon. They might be trapped in this bloody stalemate for now, but with Ace scanning the waters, Caesar keeping morale high, and their father racing back to join them, Charles knew they still had a fighting chance. Charles surveyed the chaos around him, cannon fire, splintering wood, and the thunder of heavy shots ripping through the water, and his jaw clenched. "We've got to pull out now," he said, voice low but urgent. "If the Neptunes close that net around us, we're done for." Beneath the waves, he could feel the throng of monstrous creatures gathering on the seabed. Personally, he'd have wagered he could handle them one by one, but the 2 women he carried could not survive a direct attack from such beasts. With no time to lose, Charles swept both into his arms. Their loyal lizards scuttled alongside him, instincts screaming that danger was at hand. He sprang forward and landed on deck like an arrow loosed from a bow. "Hoist the lines, now! Get us moving!" Barrett, catching sight of him, let out a relieved breath and roared, "All hands, to stations! Break through before they tighten the ring!" The crew leapt into action. Engines growled as the ship lurched forward, carving a path through the churning water. All around, desperate Neptunes launched themselves skyward, claws and teeth bared to strike. Then, at the sight of the waves streaked red with their brethren's blood, the beasts hesitated. Instead of pursuing, they plunged back beneath the surface and sank their fangs and talons into the floating corpses, ravenous for the feast. Seizing the moment, the vessel surged free, racing toward open sea while the Neptunes remained behind, lost in their grim banquet. Charles stood on the bow of the fishing vessel, heart pounding. The lanternfish he'd dispatched, and the massive Neptune he'd torn apart with his electromagnetic gun, would feed the crew for days. Best of all, the Sea Kings that had been hunting him now drifted away, their interest lost. He let out a long breath and leapt back onto the deck. Ignoring the murmurs of the other sailors gathering around, he strode straight toward the lanternfish's bioluminescent lure. At his side, the 7-star sword materialized in his grip, its blade humming with energy. Charles raised the sword and brought it down in a single precise arc. The lanternfish's glowing pouch split open, and an almost blinding shaft of golden light spilled forth, brighter than the midday sun. Shielding his eyes, Charles peered inside and saw a solid mass of metal, gleaming with impossible purity. With trembling fingers, he lifted the nugget. It was nearly the size of a basketball and shone with the unmistakable hue of pure gold. Around him, the crew closed in, jaws dropped. One sailor finally stammered, "What is that?" Few people outside the world government's elite or academic circles truly recognized unrefined gold, but Charles knew exactly what he held. A fortune in its rawest form. And now, it was his. Charles ignored the doubtful looks of his crew and strode into the cabin, clutching the small ingot of pure gold in his hand. "Don't bother me unless it's important," he called over his shoulder. "By the way, those 2 humans and that beast, treat them as you like. They're now officially members of the Rockefeller Pirates." Inside, Charles set the gleaming gold on the table and leaned closer. The moment his skin touched its surface, a subtle pulse ran through him. As a return-of-life cultivator, he immediately sensed the shift. His metabolism was decelerating, as though time itself were slowing around him. Could this be the key to extended life? He lifted the basketball-sized chunk of solid gold and watched it cast a warm, golden sheen across the cabin. Every cell in his body seemed to pause, no longer aging, no longer growing, frozen in perfect equilibrium. Longevity, he realized, might lie in harnessing this precious metal's power. But there was a cost. Along with arrested aging came a halt to his physical development. He had reached his peak strength, and now, awakened by the gold's influence, he could go no further. The human body, it seemed, had its limits, even under the promise of immortality. Charles stared at the basketball-sized ingot of pure gold and weighed his options. The legend said that wearing the metal would lock one's body at its current physical prime. At 28, Charles was well aware that he was only halfway to his peak. If he sealed himself in gold now, he'd forever be stuck at a mid-career level of strength and endurance. Only when he reached 40 could he truly claim the height of his power, and he wasn't ready to sacrifice those next dozen years of growth. Pushing the thought aside, Charles reached out and broke off a thin sliver of the metal. He needed data. Would 1 gram of this pure gold have the same effect as 10? A smaller dose might fine-tune his metabolism. Too much could lock him prematurely at some other age. He carried the sliver to his private lab, led the door behind him, and settled in for a full day of experimentation, fasting himself to isolate the metal's influence. Hour by hour, he cataloged every shift in heartbeat, body temperature, and energy expenditure. By evening, patterns emerged. A single gram of gold accelerated his metabolism, doubling its normal rate. But when he introduced 10 grams, his metabolism slumped, running at only a tenth of its usual pace. Somewhere between those extremes lay a narrow window for the desired time freeze effect. Any more gold, and instead of locking him at his prime, it would drag his body into a slowed, sluggish stasis. When Charles finally emerged from his self-imposed quarantine, he carried his discovery like a secret key. He shared the broad strokes of his findings with his peers, but he omitted the critical twist. More gold could actually backfire. He wasn't hiding the truth out of mistrust. He simply didn't want anyone dismissing the entire project once they realized that gold's benefits peaked at a precise, limited dosage. With that knowledge in hand, Charles prepared for the next round of trials, this time to pinpoint the perfect gram weight that would hold him exactly at 28 without tipping him into premature stagnation. Charles cradled the basketball-sized nugget of pure gold in his palm, marveling at its heft. Over 15 grams of untouched metal gleamed in the torchlight. Enough, he realized with a rush of excitement, to grant each of his future children 100 grams and secure their comfort for millennia. In theory, 15 grams of this purity could sustain more than 1,000 people for thousands of years. All his worries about mortality and legacy dissolved in that instant. As long as he safeguarded this treasure, his family's prosperity and longevity were assured. It was a notion that stretched his imagination, but in a world where centuries pass like days, 1,000 years feels no longer than a breath. Chapter 279. Ashi and Olga. Charles slipped the handful of pure gold into a hidden pocket, tucking it away for when he'd need it. He pushed open the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, only to find a small crowd gathered around Olga. "Hey, little boy," Olga barked, folding her arms. "My aunt is almost 200 years old. What's wrong with calling you a little boy?" Robert and Deidara leaned in beside her, crossing their arms and exchanging arrogant smirks. 200 years old, Robert scoffed. "You can't be that old if you're this short." Charles glanced down at himself, then back at Olga. They were nearly the same height. He didn't mind being small. He'd learned to make it work. "Knock it off," he said. "My size isn't your business." Olga bristled, cheeks flaming. She opened her mouth as if to retort, then clamped it shut. Revealing the truth behind her diminutive frame, her real age, was unthinkable. If that secret ever got out, it could endanger everyone. Robert and Deidara chuckled, pressing their advantage. Olga's color deepened until she looked ready to pop. That was the last straw. Charles stepped forward and delivered a swift tap to the back of each boy's head. "Seriously, what are you two up to now?" His voice was cool but carried a clear warning. "Cut it out before I really lose my patience." Charles's fist connected with a sharp crack. "Ow!" Robert and Deidara stumbled back, cradling their heads. "Dad, he hit us, said we're brats." Charles met Olga's wide-eyed stare. Instantly, the girl shrank behind Ahi, as though she'd done something wrong. He let his gaze rest on her for a moment, then turned back to the boys. "She's not wrong," he said coolly. "You two are brats." Olga peeked out, her lips pressed into a thin line, glaring at Robert and Deidara. The boys flushed, fury and humiliation warring across their faces. "All right, that's enough," barked Ahi's father from the deck. "You little troublemakers, get back below and find your mother. I've got business up here." Sif and Eve hurried forward, shepherding Robert and Deidara away. Despite their escort, the boys shot furious glances at Charles until they disappeared down the companionway. Charles turned to Ahi and Olga without a word. Olga shivered. Ahi's brow furrowed with concern. Charles, please, Ahi began hastily. It was just childish teasing, nothing more. Charles shook his head, his expression unreadable. I don't care about that. Silence fell, broken only by the soft slap of waves against the hull. I'm deciding how to deploy both of you, Charles announced, then reached out and unclasped the heavy necklace from Ashi's neck. The chain, several 100 grams of pure gold, glinted in the light. His gaze shifted to the matching gold ring on Olga's finger, and a calculating spark danced in his eyes. I'm entrusting this gold to you, he said, holding the necklace aloft. Keep it secret. If anyone discovers its true value, I'll reclaim every last gram. Ashi and Olga exchanged startled looks. Yes, sir, absolutely, Ashi replied hastily, knowing he couldn't refuse. They'd proved their worth so far. Under anyone else's command, those treasures would already have been confiscated. Charles gave a approving nod. From now on, you'll report to my science division. Ashi, you're in charge of researching the materials I require. I have full confidence in your abilities. Ashi bowed deeply. After nearly 2 centuries of service, he still welcomed a clear assignment to guide his work. Charles then turned his attention to Olga, ready to outline her role. Charles surveyed the small group before him. He couldn't afford to keep Olga on his own. She didn't seem to have any particular skills, but he needed to find her a place. From now on, you'll stay with your father and officially become a member of my Rockefeller Pirates, he declared. If you ever fall ill, head straight to the infirmary and ask for Nikin. She'll see you through. Olga offered a meek nod. She might have the attitude of a defiant little witch, at least in her own mind. But after witnessing the fierce authority Charles had displayed yesterday, she dared not test him. Next, Charles turned his gaze to the emerald-scaled shape crouched on the deck. The lizard, a creature rumored to possess unusual intelligence, shivered and pressed its head flat against the wood, eyes flicking up in anxious deference. Charles frowned for a moment, then waved a hand dismissively. Actually, scratch that. You'll be the official mascot of the Rockefeller Pirates, and since you appear able to walk on water, you'll also serve as our salvage men, responsible for diving in to rescue anyone who goes overboard. He paused to let the titles sink in. The lizard's tail gave a hopeful twitch, and it bobbed its head eagerly, almost like a panting little pug, ready to embrace its new roles. Charles allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. All right, everyone, stand back, get used to the feel of the ship, and be ready to join us when called. With that, he strode off, leaving 2 figures behind on the deck. Across from them, Olga finally exhaled in relief. Those who had never stood before Charles couldn't imagine the weight of his presence. His authority was so absolute, his command so unassailable, that resistance felt futile. Ahi, standing beside his daughter, cleared his throat. We're officially members of the Rockefeller Pirates now, he reminded her quietly. No more trifling with your temper. Keep that in check. Olga didn't argue, she simply nodded. By the lunar calendar, it was now January of 1491. After a month trapped in the doldrums, the ship had finally broken free. They were sailing into the North Sea, and the breeze at last lifted Charles's spirits. A long stretch of flat, windless waters could be torturous. Now, the scent of salt and the roll of the waves brought him genuine relief. He closed his eyes against the chill wind and let out a deep sigh. This is more like it, he murmured, the corners of his mouth lifting. Just then, a lookout's voice rang out across the deck. Captain! Ma'am! The wind's coming up fast. Looks like we're in for a fine sail. Jenny has given birth. A maid's urgent voice cut through the stillness of the forecabin. Charles jumped from his chair, guilt twisting in his chest. He'd stepped outside when Jenny's pains began, unable to bear the sound, and now he was sure he'd been gone too long. Quick, come see. Is it a boy or a girl? The maid beckoned, pulling at his sleeve. Charles dashed back inside. The air was warm and faintly tinged with blood. On the bed lay Jenny, pale but smiling, her arms cradling a freshly born infant swaddled in white linen. Gentle whimpers rose from the tiny child. He hurried forward and knelt beside them. Jenny reached up and brushed his hand. It's a girl, she whispered, exhaustion and joy mingling in her eyes. Charles's heart swelled. Lifting the baby carefully, he felt her small fingers curl around his thumb. She's perfect, he breathed. After a moment, he straightened and faced his wife. She shall be called Rockefeller Sweffa." He pressed a tender kiss to the newborn's forehead, then settled back to let Jenny admire her daughter in peace. Over the past weeks, Charles's wives have brought 9 children into the world, 2 sons and 7 daughters. Today, little Sweffa arrives as the 8th daughter, completing the Rockefeller sisterhood. Eldest to youngest they are: Estes, Sif, Eve, Julie, Slud, Shikoti, Silid, and now Sweet Sweffa. Charles surveyed his growing brood with a mixture of pride and unease. In the past 6 years, 6 of Elena's women have given him 19 children, 11 boys and 8 girls. Estes, the eldest daughter, born in 1480 HY, is now 10. Caesar, born 1482, is 8. Tesla, born 1483, is 7. Robert, Daedara, Sif, and Eve, all born in 1485, are 5. Logan, Philip, Trunks, Kakarot, Gibberta, and Julie, born 1487, are 3. Finally, Klein, Slud, Shikoti, Leonard, Sealud, and Sweffa arrived this year, 1490 by the lunar calendar, not yet a year old. 19 children in 6 years, it was more than he had ever dared imagine. Gratitude swelled in him, but alongside it came an unexpected guilt. His thoughts flickered to Jenny, pale and exhausted on the bed beside him, and he remembered his other wife's difficult labor. Charles bowed his head, the weight of fatherhood settling over him in the quiet room. Charles took Jenny's hand and spoke with quiet resolve. "This will be our last child. We won't have any more." Jenny's eyes shone with gentle understanding. "Darling," she whispered, "if you love children, I don't mind at all." His heart tightened at her words. He returned her squeeze, but could only stare at her in silence. The room felt suddenly heavy. Without another word, Charles stood and guided Jenny toward the door. Their little boy, Estes, glanced between them, then quietly slipped out of the room, leaving his parents alone in a hush of unspoken emotion. Far to the north, the legendary ship Poseidon cut through the rippling waters of the North Sea. On its deck flew the black flag of the Rockefeller pirates. Ahead, a squadron of naval warships appeared on the horizon. "Colonel Doberman," a major reported, peering through his spyglass. "The Maxi pirates, wanted for a 500 million credit bounty, are operating in these waters. Shall we commence a search?" Doberman, cigar clenched between his teeth, studied the distant sails. A jagged scar ran down his cheek, lending his face a fearsome edge. At the mention of pirates, his eyes narrowed. "Search every vessel," he ordered, voice low and hard. "No criminal escapes notice. Alert nearby naval divisions and keep them on standby for updates." The major snapped to attention immediately. "Yes, sir," he replied, and hurried off to relay the orders, leaving Colonel Doberman standing tall on the deck of the flagship as the chase began. Major Doberman actually had the surrounding colonels fall in behind his orders, something the regulations shouldn't allow since they all hold equal rank. But Doberman wasn't an ordinary officer. A graduate of the Naval Elite Academy and a protege of Admiral Zifa, he also enjoyed the full support of North Sea Governor Darren. In these waters, nobody dared refuse him. "Pirates," he snarled, flicking ash from his cigar. "They're nothing but vermin." He took a long drag and gazed at the glassy expanse before him. Since leaving the academy, he'd been seconded to Rear Admiral Sikorsky's task force in the North Sea, chasing down outlaw crews. Hundreds of pirates had fallen before him. Not a single band had slipped through his grasp. Throughout Beihai, his name inspired awe. Yet even his fearsome reputation paled beside the dread inspired by the so-called natural monster. The North Sea had long been the world's most lawless frontier, teeming with countless pirate ships. This was still before the great age of exploration. Most buccaneers never ventured beyond their familiar waters, let alone set out for the distant New World. Nearly 2/3 of them preferred to stay close to home rather than risk the open ocean. Everyone already knows where the real danger lies, so I don't even bother looking. Think about it. How many pirates, after years at sea, have dared to enter the Grand Line? And what became of them? Most either perish in the first half of the voyage, or are absorbed or wiped out by the great pirate crews of the New World. The only force from the North Blue ever to earn true renown on the Grand Line was the Bondi Walled Pirates, nicknamed the World Destroyers. Yet hardly had they set foot in the New World than they were cut down by Charles, the celebrated swordsman of the Rockefeller pirates. For comparison, even the Navy's 8th Division from the West Blue managed to survive 5 full years in the New World. and nobody mocked them when they finally fell. After all, if the Marines can be defeated, why shouldn't a pirate crew suffer the same fate? Given that kind of history, it's no surprise that hundreds of hopeful buccaneers prowl the open seas, but very few dare actually enter the Grand Line. They'd much rather stake their claims in their own one-third of the world, where the odds feel a little less deadly. That's exactly why Marine Headquarters sends fresh squadrons into each of the 4 seas every year, just to remind would-be pirates how unforgiving the wide ocean really is. Not every pirate dares to sail the Grand Line. Out here on the eerily calm sea, Doberman's heart suddenly thudded in his chest, a bad premonition washing over him. What's happening? Why do I feel like something's wrong? He raised his head and stared toward the horizon. At first it looked like a small dark smudge against the sky. Is that an island? But as it drew nearer, the shape shifted and grew unmistakably. No, a ship! A pirate ship! He grabbed his spyglass and trained it on the approaching vessel. There, flying defiantly from the bow, was a black flag bearing a skull pierced by a single sword. Doberman's blood ran cold. That crude design had been Charles's own handiwork, drawn on a whim with barely a second thought. When Elena had teased him earlier, "Your pirate flag is unique. Does that sword really pierce the skull?" Charles had only blushed at how slapdash it looked. Now, watching it snap in the wind, there was no denying its message. Lowering the spyglass, Doberman's brow furrowed. The pirate ship cut steadily through the waves, heading straight for them. He felt the weight of that makeshift banner as though it were a challenge, and knew they had precious little time to prepare. Colonel Doberman peered into the distance, disbelief etched on his face. A pirate ship that big, in the North Sea? He wondered. But doubts vanished the moment he laid eyes on it. "Bring the launch around," he roared. "Board that vessel and eliminate every pirate on deck. Throw them overboard." He slammed his fist against the railing, excitement radiating from him. After 3 or 4 days at sea with nothing to show for it, he'd already been planning the trip back to Hong Kong to regroup. Who knew when he'd get another chance? Now at last, he'd found a pirate ship, albeit not the one he'd been hunting. No matter, pirates were pirates, and he intended to wipe them out. As Doberman's order rang out, the sailors sprang into action, steering the ship toward the dark silhouette ahead. They knew the colonel's temperament all too well, merciless toward any hint of piracy, and quick to assume that anyone who dared question him must be in league with the enemy. Better to obey and survive. Once you join the Marines, you must be prepared to give your life for justice. That single sentence sealed Charles's fate as a naval recruit.